Hello and welcome to episode 140 of The Imperial Truth. I'm going to keep this one intro short because we have a slightly longer episode than normal with the return of our Sons of Heresy series. Thank you for Andy for coming on. We're going to look into the Raven Guard in just a little bit. Before we go anywhere though, Element Games are one of our sponsors and they are fantastic and they get stuff to you reasonably quickly. Well, pretty quickly to be fair, which is all the difference, and you get 20% off Games Workshop in the pre-order week. I would say at the moment, just with the way that Games Workshop stock is running, if you want to order and you want it for that week, then you have to be fairly quick online as stuff goes out of stock and comes in on a second wave. But if you want it that week, then you have to be pretty sharp. But yeah, 20% off. I've just ordered a few bits for them, a present for my brother-in-law and some colour shifting paint, and there's lots of tools and all kinds of stuff. And if you use the link in the show notes or on the website, then the show gets a little kickback and it all helps pay for all the hosting and the equipment and other little things as well. And then alongside them we have Geek Shield. If you have life insurance and you're not sure what it's doing for you, then you can give Pete a message and he will go through it with you and work out exactly whether it does work or doesn't work, what you can expect from it, and whether you might be looking at something else as well. It's not a nice topic to talk about, but it's one that does need talking about. So you can go to Geek Shield. All the links for those are in the show notes as usual. And now this part of the show might have been a bit longer had we had any news or releases. Mortis is out, and I am just over halfway through it, and it's pretty fantastic actually. If you like Big Titans and some other bits as well, then I thoroughly recommend it. Obviously it's sold out. It'll be a few months before the normal regular edition comes out, but maybe next episode we can do a little bit a spoiler free kind of review of it, but I haven't quite finished it yet, so we won't do that. And then again, it's not strictly Horus Heresy, though Adeptus Titanicus is sort of Horus Heresy. The War Master for Adeptus Titanicus is a crazy piece of kit. If you want to hear more about that and you don't listen to Full Stride, you can come and listen to us all, to myself and Matt at Full Stride, the Full Stride podcast, where we talk all things Adeptus Titanicus, and we had a bit of a dive into the War Master. I think we're carrying on a little bit with that in the next episode as well, exploring it a little bit more. But it was a bit of a surprise, and it's mega cool, I think. And just because I normally do this at the end, and I appreciate that some people might not listen to the closing of the show all the time, if you have any feedback for us, Greg at theimperialtruth.com, or contact us on one of the social media pages or whatever we have, channels we have, should I say. If you've got ideas for the show, feedback about the show, questions, then feel free to get in touch, because A, it's always good to hear from people, but B, it can influence what we do moving forward. There's no guarantees on that. We will take everything on board and decide what we're going to do, but this is a show for the listeners. Without listeners, the show is pointless. So please feel free to get hold of me. I have the last few days or so I've been looking at a couple of little things that I might be doing with the show. Just got to work out how they work, different things like different recording methods and stuff like that. I appreciate the show's okay, but there are others that do it better in terms of quality of sound, things like that. I'm no means an expert, but I could also do with getting this mixer off my desk, things like that as well. But I'm also considering putting out a bit of a questionnaire. There's a few things that I think gathering some information about listeners could be quite a useful little tool for a couple of different things. So I'm considering building one of those. But as I say, just watch the feeds and whatever, and if I do get around to it by next episode, then we'll put it on there. But yeah, anything you feel free to feed back on. I won't hold you up any longer though, and we're going to take a dive into the Raven Guard. joining me today. Welcome to the show, Mr. Andy O'Reilly. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, Greg. Thanks very much for having me on.
That's quite all right, and I've brought you on because you've been playing Raven Guard a little while?
About 5-6 years now, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, they were the force I started with when I started playing 30k and haven't really looked back, although I have dabbled in other legions since.
Excellent stuff, and we'll get into your gaming knowledge and little bits of wisdom later on. But should we start by going over the history of the Raven Guard Legion?
Let's do it.
The 19th. Always good to remind yourself which legions are the numbers, because there's a couple that always kind of don't stick in my head properly. Unofficially referred to as the Pale Nomads or the Dust Clad. So they didn't have a proper...
No, I mean, and that kind of comes back to when they were kind of before kind of Korax came on the scene. That kind of relates to how they interacted with, you know, the Sons of Horus, or I suppose then the Lunar Wolves, and their interaction with the missions they did with Horus at that time, kind of almost as a foil, I suppose, to the Sons of Horus. Yes,
indeed. We go right back into the Age of Unification, and for some warlords who stood against the Emperor, an assassin would be sent, only revealing themselves when placing a gun at the warlord's temple. An offer would be made, the choice to kneel or die. For those who chose to kneel, fine. For those who did not, the 19th would be sent from the shadows, evening the odds against much larger forces. So they've been from the shadows right from the start.
Yeah, this is it, right? They, you know, there's the term, almost the hidden hand of the Emperor, I suppose, at that point. They've always been that kind of force that's been kind of deployed as infiltrators, that's got into position before the enemy knew they were there, revealing themselves at the right kind of time.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's why there's always this kind of interaction because when you say that phrase out there, as I've just said, it sounds almost like you're describing Alpha Legion. So there's the the interaction between how those two different legions operate is quite similar in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's a subject for another show in itself, of how everyone tries to talk about the legions in their one distinct style, but nothing is ever so clear cut in this heresy. You know, which part of the Emperor do you represent? Well, there's no one clear answer for every Primarch. There's no one clear answer for the way you fight. There's no one clear answer for who are the opposite legions, anything like that. So yeah, you're right. It's there are elements of the way the Alpha Legion work in this, but yeah, I do like right from the start. You know, before the Primarch came, but even later on when the Primarch came, they would strike from the shadows, and they would go back into the shadows as well. And sometimes the battle would be over, sometimes it wouldn't be, and it would carry on somewhere else. But they're doing it from the darkness.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's almost what kind of Horus liked about them as well, is that he could use them as that kind of force alongside his own to play that vital part. But then they'd almost retreat into the shadows afterwards, and the glory was laid at his feet. And he was happy to kind of take that credit. So it was a useful tool that he could use before Korax came along.
Yeah, and the other thing that's noted here is, and I suppose it's something that I don't always think of immediately, is that it wasn't just the striking from the shadows, but the ability to watch, to be patient. And
yeah, they spent a good amount of time, didn't they, kind of observing their enemy, working out almost the governance of a system, kind of understanding where its key points of strength were, so that when they did strike, it could be in a kind of a strike hard, strike fast kind of way, isolating and kind of taking out those core vital points of an enemy, and almost kind of minimizing this kind of outward bloodshed, but really just kind of picking something apart in a strategic way.
Yeah, that knife in the dark. And they recruited, well, they got a majority of their recruits came from the Xeric tribes of the Asiatic Dusk Fields. So we're talking at a place with constant warfare over limited natural resources, something that would, kind of echoes to later on when the Legio's fighting. And they were forced, as usual, to give up their firstborn sons to the Gene Forges, the one thing that you don't necessarily associate, the one thing between early 19th Legion and the Raven Guard as we know them now, is they had a propensity to cruelty. And a disdain for those who they considered weak. The Xeric culture demanded a beaten enemy be watched carefully and any rebellious behaviour be crushed thoroughly before they could be struck against.
Yeah, it's definitely a kind of a part of them that kind of was then weeded out as the Legion kind of grew and they were united with their Primarch. But I think that's just the kind of nature of those that were selected to be part of the Legion at that time. It was that kind of nature for survival that kind of bred that a little bit.
And not helped, one of the little bits of the kind of where they talk about them fighting in the Central Asiatic regions is, they would identify key targets, as we said, and weak elements of the army, this particularly against Ursh and led by the tyrant Callaghan, and they would be there and wait. And when the attack came, it was swift, it was overwhelming. But it's claimed they fought against the worst of psycho-wrought weaponry that the Ursh deployed, and many veterans of that age were touched by a darkness that stayed with them. So you've got this cruel kind of nature to the Xeric warriors themselves, but also this they've seen dark things. And
that's true, and you see that kind of the fact that those kind of psycho-wrought weapons were brought upon them had such an influence throughout the Legion, and they've never been kind of a huge fan of those kind of psycho weaponries. And I feel that that's still kind of a long-standing thing that came back to that battle and the use that Callaghan deployed upon them.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting little story. When I was reading back on it, because I read, so we're talking book 3, aren't we? So we're talking 7 years ago, something like that, 6 years ago.
Yeah, at least.
At least. Without looking up, I wouldn't know. And it's good to go back, as you say. We've got that, but also that beyond Unification of Terror, they were tasked with fighting the Xenos of the Moon of Lysithia in the Jovian range, where there's no real details. But the Xenos were eliminated at the cost of the settlers' lives, as well as a large number of the 19th. And then many of those survivors were called back, never to be returned to the Legion. But there's no real evidence of it. It's all kept kind of shush-shush.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame, isn't it, that there isn't really kind of any other details on that story, because it's really interesting as to why that happened. But as you say, it's kind of almost been redacted, I suppose. Yeah,
and it's always that balance of how much do you reveal and how much, we could see a story later on that goes back and touches on it, but having some of those mysteries is quite good. What we do have is some of those people who did survive had this numeral X on their shoulder for decades. And we see, when we go and talk about Gate 42, Shade Captain Voltri, who's a dreadnought, Feribundus class, fought there. So, there was still the odd one around. And
That's it, isn't it? It kind of dies out. You have that rune that kind of exists, and then towards the later stages of the heresy, it's only ever really seen on those dreadnoughts. If you do see them at all, for those legionaries that existed all that time ago. But it's a nice touch, right? It's nice that you can pull that into the history of the Legion and kind of look back to those really early campaigns, and then see them kind of the effect and the impact that has through the Legion over time.
Yeah, what really kind of intrigues me here is why were the ones redacted and why were these allowed to stay? Like, there's a real, who was the luckier one for starters, and what exactly went on there that some of them could be useful to the fighting that was carrying on. But
yeah,
hey ho. But as you said, as you've alluded to, the 19th were pulled in to fight along with the Lunar Wolves under the guidance of Horus for quite a while, and Horus really valued their skills, and they did work well together, I suppose, with the spear tip going in to strike the head, the useful kind of the nature of the way the Raven Guard work in the shadows and on the edges becomes very complementary.
Yeah, and at that time they wore grey armour, which I think was kind of why they were one of the reasons why they were kind of called dust clad, and they had this kind of they were known to kind of apply this war paint, which was made up of dust, to their own faces on the eve of the battle, and have this kind of this tribal, almost tribal-esque markings across their armor as well, which is quite nice and quite cool. And that's why I suppose with the grey armor it kind of led them to be kind of dust clad, in the shadows, supporting the Sons of Horus and letting them do their thing, but kind of in the background there, making the job of the Lunar Wolves slightly easier, I suppose.
Yeah, and sometimes used to block lines to the retreat and cut down those who fled, which I'm not sure would have helped the psyche of that early legion in terms of the job they're doing. But what's interesting is it also notes that they struck often unseen, almost before ordered to do so. Like they were in. It must have been in tune with the fighting that was going on. So it shows you how well they worked together.
Yeah. I mean, they had that kind of vital sense, and I think that comes again from kind of knowing, watching an enemy, understanding what where the key elements are that enable them to do their job so thoroughly.
And then it's a bit of a weird one doing that job for the Lunar Wolves. Horus obviously trusted and respected their abilities, but while the Lunar Wolves numbers expanded, the 19th did not. They almost stayed this subsection of Horus's legion for a while, which must be a weird kind of place for them to be. Maybe because he liked, or maybe there was an element of liking their roots coming from the Xeric tribes. We can only really speculate about that to a certain point. But the Lunar Wolves changed. They've got the Chthonian and the Terran, and more it became Chthonian, whereas the 19th stayed with this kind of in this bubble of how they were, with little outside influence on the way they fight, in terms of their own legion.
Yeah, they didn't really move away from that savage kind of tribal element that they came from historically, whilst the Lunar Wolves kind of maybe grew in numbers. And I think that's why I think that's why Horus quite liked that, because he liked that element of control over that force, is that it was very much a tool that he could deploy in whichever way he saw fit to do so. But it must have been strange for those kind of members of the Legion, of the then Raven Guard, because it kind of, where's their sense of belonging, really?
Yeah.
They're tied back into such an old history with no kind of pathway forward being used but in this tool. It doesn't really expand upon it, but as you say, being used to do a job in the shadows, do their own thing, where is their sense of belonging and their sense of growth? And I think that kind of really stalled, I suppose, until Korax came along.
Also, it's maybe a little insight into Horus's hubris here, in that, maybe it's me just portraying it from my own warped sense, but you've got a legion here that is working alongside Horus, but works in the shadows, is doing the jobs that aren't glorious, and also, because of the nature of working in the shadows, is not always known about. So Horus gets to lord all of that glory with the Lunar Wolves.
Yeah, this is exactly it, right? The credit goes completely to Horus and the Lunar Wolves, helped in no small part by those members of the Raven Guard. But I think I absolutely agree with you. I think that's why Horus liked it, really, is that he could use them as a tool and take all the glory for himself. Which I guess is it's fine, right? At the end of the day, that's how he operated, and that's kind of his character, and we've kind of seen that develop throughout the whole Horus Heresy anyway, so it fits in quite nicely. And obviously they were without a Primarch, so it makes sense that they didn't have that kind of real sense of belonging or standing on their own feet in that way.
Absolutely. It's one of those it's one of those kind of markers of where Horus will go down the line. That's all. And at this time, even by now, the effects of the genes were starting to take hold as well. So they were becoming unnaturally white, and dark hair turning black as midnight, and some of them, their eyes turning entirely black. So that was in them from the start. What's really interesting in all of that is you talked a little bit there about links to Alpha Legion, and sometimes they can be linked very heavily to the Night Lords as well. What we have at this point, as we see with the Raven, Corax changes the Legion, and although there's a lot to be said for each Legion, that isn't it handy that that Russ ended up on Fenris, and isn't it handy that various Primarchs turned up on various planets. You wonder what would happen if the Raven, if Corax was a different character to this Legion.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Like the Primarch that I think about is almost like Perturabo's story. That kind of that environment he grew up on, in that kind of that cruelty, that world, and obviously for Corax, as you say, it's the fact that he grew up on that prison, that prison moon, Lyceus, which is kind of this the idea of kind of slavery and prisoners, and that foil against the early elements of the Legion, with that kind of tendency, as you said, to cruelty themselves. So it's one of those funny things. Is, of course, he ended up in that way.
Yeah, and it's strange. So some legions, their Primarch comes and they shape the Legion, but you could see that they were meant to be together. It was obvious that Legion and that Primarch were going to be together, and although things changed, they're essentially kept the spirit going. These guys, and you say the Perturabo's influence on the Iron Warriors was immense and bloody, but also form changing, and the same goes for the Raven Guard. And you wonder if Corax was on Chemos, for instance, what would this Legion be? Or if Nostramo, and is it Corax that changes, or is it the Night Lord? If the Night Lord had been given this Legion, which you could see from the cruelty and everything from the start there, it could easily have been his Legion. Obviously, there are genetic markers and what have you, but the Raven Guard could have gone a number of ways.
Right. I mean, who would have thought we'd be talking about the age-old concept of nature versus nurture?
Indeed.
With the Horus Heresy, right? But that is essentially where it ties into.
Yeah, and it plays more of a part in certain places. I kind of have this sort of belief that there was a guiding hand on a lot of those Primarchs and where they landed. Not all of them, maybe, but some of them fit too nicely to. I mean, there might have been caricatures back in the 80s, but as we move forwards into the 2020s, we can have a bit more of a nuanced review of how they work.
Yeah, it's too much of a coincidence.
Indeed. So let's talk about it. Corax himself materialised in a lightless chamber far beneath the surface of a barren moon called Lichen, which is interesting that he materialised when all the others kind of mostly barreled down from space. I haven't seen any kind of thing about that. That's the warp, I suppose. That's the way it works.
Yeah, no, it is funny though, isn't it? The other stories, they talk of them, landing on a surface or landing on a planet, but this kind of Corax is already there. He's discovered in this chamber by it's a team of miners, isn't it? That
yes.
Discovered him.
Yeah, by a stroke of luck, I think it says. Which again, where all these Primarchs land. Who finds them is a very important thing, and I tend to think there might have been more than one guiding hand, both positive and negative, involved on those. But yeah, he was taken by the slaves and hidden from the overseers when he could easily have gone the other way, and who knows what kind of Primarch you have then. But much like all the other Primarchs, he matured extremely quickly, and all those that saw him or were around him saw him as a gift to them. And his name is their word for saviour or deliverer. So already, imagine growing up with that sense of hope, plastered on you. Primarchs aren't normal people. Maybe they expect it to a point, but you kind of think that must have gone throughout that whole prison. Any of them, most of them, knowing that this person's there and that they've got to protect him because he's their chance of getting out. So
right,
yeah,
he's their messiah, isn't he?
Yes.
That's how they see him. They are slaves. They see him as their opportunity to get out, of an opportunity for there to be change.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And this is talk about Alcatraz. This is a prison moon high above Kievar, where the guilds run it, and was it justice and human dignity had no place in the guild's world. These people were sent up there to work, and thank you very much, you're not getting out of there. Corax takes a different view, of course. He would liberate the prisoners from their cruel existence, but he had to wait. He had to bide his time, and he listened, and he plotted and planned, and they worked. They worked it using him. I mean, thankfully, when you've got a Primarch there, you haven't got super strength and everything else. You've got a superhuman brain as well.
Yeah, right. It helps, doesn't it? But and this ties into again what we talked about earlier with this notion of listening, of watching, of waiting, of being able to kind of understand where the points are, and this idea of just waiting and being able to bide your time, to know that you're not quite ready to kind of start the uprising just yet, but you will be in time. But it helped that Corax had this, he has this kind of unnatural, I suppose, psychic skill to enable himself to not be detected in the way that other people might be, which kind of enabled him to kind of go around and understand, where the guards were, what the nature of the prison was exactly on this prison, this tough prison moon, and kind of just understand a little bit about his own innate Primarch-led abilities, which is I think is quite interesting, really, because they don't really talk about any other Primarch. Obviously, each Primarch has their own abilities, and they all have kind of a sense probably of some kind of psychic element to them. And Corax's one is very much of that associated with this whole presence or being able to will himself to be unseen to the mind of a normal observer. If he wills it, that's how they talk about it. It's him willing this kind of presence to be in the shadows.
The only one that is kind of written about in a similar way is Lehman Russ's Roar, his psychic roar he does, and or howl or whatever you want to do with it, that he can put out there, and he knows the effect it has on people. But that's kind of, it's this limited control of whatever power they have in a very focused manner, which it's not normal. We know all the Primarchs are touched by the warp in some way, some more than others. But Corax is extremely useful, even if it's limited in its manifestation. Yeah,
it is, as you say, it's a small kind of nuanced element to him, and it only really seems to work for kind of the human mind, I suppose. It doesn't tend, there's kind of evidence that it doesn't work against kind of the machine element. So it's very much this kind of connection between himself and who he sees as observing him.
It's a Jedi mind trick.
Essentially. That's exactly it. It is essentially a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah, absolutely. And that allows him to be to lead this guerrilla war, essentially, in this prison. It starts off just by gathering resources. They bleed the prison authorities of weapons and munitions and sabotage key systems to a point where they can fight, and fight they do. And
it's about this kind of method of guerrilla warfare is about kind of sapping the morale of them. It does two things. It simultaneously kind of teaches the slavers that by these small victories, kind of doing something, then retreating back into the shadows, it builds their confidence at the same time as sapping the morale of these overseers that really thought themselves to be complete lords and masters and untouchable. So it's got that dual element, really, that kind of, it starts building a process up and almost kind of lighting the touch paper, so to speak, for that full final kind of assault.
Yeah, and I think sometimes Corax might not get the might not get talked about in the way of a grand strategist, but this is the kind of war that needs that grand plan. It's not as showy as the others, and it's not as brutal as the others, but it takes time. It's got to be done over time. It's got to be done in such a way that doesn't commit too much in one place and expose yourself to being hit. But he led this war. All Primarchs are talked about as great generals, but when we talk about people who plan wars and things like that, people look at Perturabo and the Lion and whoever and Horus, and maybe Corax doesn't get as much of a achievement in that respect.
Well, he doesn't really, but it's true. But what always comes to my mind is there's this story, isn't there, about and we're going a little bit off track here, but his interaction with Guilliman and Guilliman's kind of simulation, and there's this tale that I think Corax manages to kind of beat Guilliman 3 times, I think it is, in this kind of simulation kind of environment, by trying new strategies, trying new novel stuff that hadn't been thought about. And then obviously, Robitaille is like, enough is enough, cool, I've understood that now, and he's never beaten him again. But so it's almost that kind of that small novel kind of strategies he puts into play, but that's the limit of it in a way. Yeah,
it's very much like the Imperium itself. Even in 30k times with this grand kind of expansion and what have you, it was very set in its ways. And Guilliman is kind of the exemplar of that. He has the form and structure to make war and everything else, and Corax is a little bit on the edges. He's in the shadows, and he doesn't play by everyone's rule book. And that allows him to think differently, and I think, as we see through the books in the Heresy, that eventually kind of leads him to think that he's not as much part of this system. A little bit like the Khan in a way, that he's part of it, but he's also separate.
He sits kind of slightly outside of it, and it leads to. Doesn't it lead to kind of certain use of things like the Moritats, for example, come directly from Corax, and that kind of almost that suicidal kind of use of a man or a series of men to do a certain job is kind of been unheard of before, because, as you say, it kind of sits out that realm of doing battle nobly, I suppose.
Absolutely. And the other thing to note with the Liberation is. We had a lot of political prisoners up in this prison, obviously with the nature of the kind of organisation that would have a prison like that on a moon. Anyone who disagrees with them could be seen as trouble. So they shoved a load of them up there. But there are the normal rapists, murderers, robbers, all those kind of people up there as well. And Corax uses them with that one condition, that they will never repeat again. Like, this is your redemption.
He has to make that. He has to make that choice himself, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He has to look upon them and think, is this? Are they a tool I can use in that way? Are they salvageable? And he gives them that condition, doesn't he? Like, this is it. You can join the league, you can join, be part of the uprising, but you have to put aside those kind of elements of how you used to be.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to. Annoy or anger a Primarch, so I wonder how many of them did. So we have a world there that the prison gets freed, and immediately into the aftermath appears the Emperor. One of those many circumstances of good timing for the Emperor.
Right, he almost turns up at the wrong time. Right, he turns up just before the war has been won.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of it's really funny timing in that way.
It's really interesting because the Emperor's timing, is, it can't be down to him alone. But the way he turns up for Angron, Corax, Mortarion, those 3 particularly, I think there might be a couple more. Like Mortarion, he turns up just in time, because if Mortarion goes up that hill to fight his dad, he dies. And it's only the Emperor stepping in that keeps him alive. Angron, he turns up just before Angron's about to die. And whatever you think of the decision to make then. And this one, he turns up just in time for Corax to make his action, but I wonder if he just realises that Corax is in control here. It's a different situation, to be fair.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it kind of ties into that. The last kind of element of the Liberation is this use of these kind of atomic weapons that they kind of built up as this stockpile of atomic weapons that were starting to be used, kind of the bombardment of Kiev, and then the emperor arrives. And I think, that there's no kind of discussion about what they speak about. There's no kind of history or details, or only that they spoke for a long time. But, part of me thinks or wonders that it's almost to kind of help Korax understand the nature of the victory he's about to deliver here, and the cost and the use of such dramatic weapons to achieve it, just to understand, or to help his son understand the nature of that.
I almost wonder if there's a part of me that could see Korax wondering if he's doing the right thing, and the Emperor knowing the wars he wants him to fight and the atrocities that he will have to commit later, to just help him do this one as a first step along that course. It's like, at some point I'm going to need this guy not to worry about what he's doing to a planet, and I need him to unleash Exterminatus. So but whatever happens there, he comes to Korax alone, which is quite interesting, which he doesn't really do for the others. And they talk, which you can understand, the nature of the Legion and Korax himself. But as you say, no aid was given to him. He was left to fight it himself. And as you say, there was a stockpile of atomic weaponry left on the prison moon. Because, of course, the prisoners will never be able to get hold of it.
Right.
And this course of action, though terrible, was his only. And there's this gravity well between the moon and planet, and he, bombarded the manufacturing cities with his atomic payload.
Which is brutal, isn't it? And it is undeniably brutal, and it does kind of line up with what you've just said about kind of planting the seed in Korax's mind, to help him understand the choice that he's making here and the result, and being confident that it is still the right choice to make.
Yeah.
And the sacrifice is necessary, and the brutality is necessary. And you see that, I think, as a kind of thread that runs through different kind of novels that talk about Korax and the way his thinking is, even when it comes to him choosing to kind of leave Isfahan, retreat from Isfahan himself, while his legion is still on the planet, still being completely brutally decimated. And it ties again back into that: is the sacrifice worth it?
Yeah. And it's that hard lesson. I suppose as a guerrilla fighter, they know there's a certain amount of acceptable losses, but every loss is felt keener than those you are fighting. At this point, he's faced with the decision of, I'm going to kill thousands or tens of thousands of people, but in doing so, I will save millions. And that is, that's a slightly different lesson to learn, I suppose. But it is done, and Kievar is, the guilds capitulate immediately. I don't blame them. And Lycus is renamed as Deliverance.
Which is a nice kind of tying up of that the Messiah story,
yes,
I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
The deliverer. The deliverer delivers them, and then the planet's named Deliverance. Indeed.
It all fits nicely. There's nothing, 40k and 30k can be very on the nose with their namings, but it doesn't always hurt to make sure the lesson gets hammered home to someone.
Right.
But this was over a century into the Great Crusade. Obviously, he's the 19th Primarch, fairly late on, and he then gets, and this is why there's that strong link with the Lunar Wolves. But he gets taken to his legion and starts to immediately meld his style of fighting, that stealth and guile, with the vigilance and the swiftness that the legion had before.
It's obvious. You can see how he does that, but he also simultaneously starts to kind of weed out a little bit some of the more kind of cold-blooded, kind of tribal nature of the Legion, and he has to do that because of the statement he made to those prisoners when he was liberating the moon. In the same way that he said, you can come along, but you've got to you've got to kind of change your ways. He has to do the same thing to the legion that he's picking up. He can't just carry on those tribal ways, because he just, otherwise how does he keep everyone on side, so to speak?
Yeah, and I think he, there's a nature of Corax isn't like, he's not as cruel. He's not himself. He's not as cruel as these others, and he's not. There's that kind of hope, that belief within Corax, which ultimately causes some of his pain. But it must have been really difficult to come in, even as a Primarch, and Lord Arcus, who's been commanding them for 3 decades, is just told, "Yep, you've got a non-combat role now. Thank you very much." And he did that to quite a few high-ranking officers. So this understanding of knowing where he has to make those changes for the Legion to work. It's not just coming in and saying, "You will now fight this way." It's an understanding of, with you in that position, that's never going to happen. I need to clean out the Legion. And they took it up quickly. The Legion did change immediately, and it worked. And as you say, this is where him and Guilliman had their little battle simulations. And I think this was the birth of the Moritat within that.
Yes, it was. It was very much the first time that was used. So, which is really nice in itself, right? Is to see that kind of use of a particular type of troop that then does exist for, or is deployed by other legions as well.
Yeah, and not just his legion. He he quickly understood, or he always understood, the nature of the war he fought, and that it wasn't just the way they fought it. They would also need new tools to fight with. So he talks to Mars, and for all that Mars shouldn't be innovating too much, it does quite a lot in 30k and 40k. But we get the Shadow Hawk as a variant of the Thunder Hawk, so it's got technologies that make it invisible to the most sensitive of augurs, which you also see with some of their ships as well. If you read the various books later on in the Black Library. What else do we get? The Whisper Cutter.
You get the Whisper Cutter, which is the kind of the transport flyer that Raven Guard, 30k Raven Guard players have been crying out for ever since their Black Book was released, which is this really cool kind of flyer that's known for kind of dropping legionaries into a war zone just in a completely silent way with no detection, and it's almost just very drops them in. Then they get out, and then it takes off again, and it was often used to kind of drop in kind of more Dathan and particular kind of strike forces within the Raven Guard, and it's very cool. And this kind of link with Mars, this link with the Mechanicum, kind of almost I think goes back to the kind of the liberation, because I think that the kind of tech world from Kievar gets handed over, am I right, to the Mechanicum to kind of rebuild it, so that connection, that understanding between the Mechanicum and the Raven Guard is there from a very, very early stage.
And what's interesting, it would be interesting to know exactly what the motivations were, so that the Master Artificers of Kievar began to oversee kind of the technology coming in, and there's an extremely good chance, it's like a good 90% chance that they were doing this just to make sure that they were useful,
right?
Because they were part of the system. That even if they didn't actively partake in the nature of the prisoners going up, they certainly didn't stand against it. Otherwise, they would have been up there themselves. So there's a bit of self-preservation going here for the Master Artificers, but creates this link between, as you say, it's a very unique link. We know the Iron Hands and all those with their strong Mars influence, but this is a very different aspect. That I suppose again the White Scars have some little bits where they boost their engines and things, but none quite to the level of the Raven Guard. And alongside with all this new equipment, we have what essentially started as Mark V armor, which through I think Laurie Golding really hates the fact that there's a Mark V armor because it's not even a Mark. But I completely understand that. I also think there's an issue with people not mixing armour because they think it's just Mark V and they don't want to have Mark V armour, but that's a different story. We have Mark VI armour, which is armour sent out to the Iron Warriors and Salamanders, who looked at it, its lack of heavy plating and was like, yeah, no, we're not having that, thank you very much. But instead of just chucking it, they thought, well, we're going to give it a go, and there's Corax going, yeah, thank you, I'll take that. It's
he turns it around, doesn't he? Like Mark VI armor was the armor that never meant to survive. It was meant to be just like this is rubbish, not useful. And then it fits so nicely with the way the Raven Guard do battle, so perfectly that it's kind of their natural armor mark.
I like the idea that a lot of Primarchs were like, no, and they were going down the line. And then there's Perturabo, which is speculation exists that this happened. Perturabo's like, oh, I just don't want to see any of that. I mean, look at it. It's just terrible. It's not heavy enough. Give it to the Raven Guard. There's only a few of them. And then when it fails, it can just be forgotten about. Thank you very much.
Right. And the opposite happens. Instead, it gets named after the Legion themselves. It gets named Corvus Pattern Power Armor. So the ultimate 360 reversal there.
Yeah, and in fighting against the Eldar, which is almost the perfect place to use it as well. Corax is no fool. None of them are. But yeah, such was the success of the Legion in ousting the Eldar that Mark VI, got named after them, after Corax. Simple, Corvus. And, got redesignated because of the nature of the fact it wasn't rolled out quite like that, and this Mark V mixed match of armour became a mark in on it of itself. But there aren't many legions with stuff named after them, and they absolutely made the most of the beaky helms, which are also just a nice touch for the Raven Guard as well.
Yeah, they're kind of synonymous with them, aren't they?
Yeah, indeed. But we should move on to Battle of Gate 42. So this is one of the kind of a defining point for the Legion, really. And it's sort of one of their biggest setbacks, but kind of pushes them forward and also foreshadows the events of Isfahan. So this is set shortly after Ulanor, so it's a short gap actually between them and Isfahan. They were recalled from operations on the Corwood Energy of the Ghoul Stars to join several legions under Horus's command for the compliance of the Acum Sothos cluster, which had been won by the Lunar Wars. It was now failing as a form of mass psychosis overtook the population and they rebelled. So what's happened is the Xenos parasites, which mature within the eye sockets, and as they do, they gain rudimentary control over their hosts, whilst forming this alien gestalt consciousness, focused on these primary hosts called the Unsighted Kings. So that is grim within itself.
Yeah, it's pretty horrendous, right?
Yeah, I just always... you see those videos on Facebook of, like, this person's had this little tick burrowed under their skin and they're bad enough, right? But the thought of these things living in your eye sockets and then just controlling you as well. Grim. So Horus in his... I don't know what to call it really, his arrogance, I suppose, couldn't have a world that he'd turn to compliance, turn on him. So he vows this oath of moment to reclaim it no matter the cost. And this is where I wonder how much of his using of the Legion of the Raven Guard before that plays into this. So the plan is this lightning war to purge the afflicted whilst preserving the infrastructure for future repopulation. Swift victory would also serve to, enhance his new rank of War Master and to quieten everyone down. So we got the Lunar Wolves, the Space Wolves, the Iron Warriors, and a Raven Guard to converge on a heavy fortified lair for the Unsighted Kings, just an overwhelming conventional assault. Which
again, I mean, Horus is not. He's not stupid. He should know that goes very much against the nature of how the Raven Guard do battle, and how it's weird, right? Because he used them previously when he was with the Lunar Wolves as the kind of still much the hidden hand. So to call upon them to make this kind of full frontal assault straight into the guns of the defenders of Gate 42 is really quite bizarre.
Maybe there was an overconfidence in the ability of the Space Marines just to power through. And maybe the War Master wanted it to be a pure fist. Like, this is not subtle. This is a complete disintegration of your army. Who knows, really? But, there's some interesting things. Maybe it was a little bit of a show of dominance in that, look, I've got these 3 legions fighting the way I want to fight. But yeah, you'd think with the Space Wolves and the Iron Warriors and the Lunar Wolves there, the Raven Guard could have been used in a slightly more subtle manner.
Right. I mean, they're the odd ones out.
Indeed.
In a way.
Yeah, and they can fill in gaps and do other things you need to do. Yeah. So the Outer Worlds are brought to heel fairly quickly, and Corax is arguing that it's definitely a waste of resources and my warriors to do this. So I'm going to just draw off enemy forces, strike and feint away, and allow the others to come in and kill the remaining defenders. What we have then is maybe a reason why the Raven Guard are in this, were tasked with a full-out assault, is Perturabo's not keen on this at all, and basically accuse him of cowardice, of trying to avoid combat, and it needs Russ to be the steady head to say...
Which is a phrase you never thought you'd say.
No, yeah. He's just stepping in going, lads, we've got an enemy to fight. We've all had a drink. And Russ has counselled, he's telling Corax to heed the word of the War Master, which is understandable. The Emperor's put the War Master, put Horus as the War Master in charge, and there's certainly an appeal to everyone working together, and maybe just suck it up and do it, because otherwise, God, you might get legions turning against each other. You never want that.
Exactly, right?
Exactly, and to use that bitterness to fight. So Corax does kind of sort of agree, but he pulls in his Terran-dominated companies into the vanguard, and those ones who were very much most keen on the plan in itself. But what we get is, a prelude to the Urgal Depression, really. The assault companies decimated, the attack faltering. Corax himself led with a forlorn hope. His battle cry inspiring the Legion to such efforts that they carried a breach and took Gate 42. Horus, has the honour, of course, of executing the Unsighted Kings, and with that, the place is won.
So basically, essentially, what happens is nothing has changed since how Horus has previously used the Raven Guard. Still taking the glory for himself, but ultimately the cost for the Raven Guard is huge. And I think the number is they're left with something like only 80,000 after this battle.
Yeah, and we talk a little bit about it later, don't we? But it's harsh. It's really harsh. And again, starts that little bit of Corax thinking about how his legion sits in and what his purposes are as this. 80,000 under his command. What I like is, he swore never to serve under the War Master again. Right, this is like, I've done it. Cool. You're War Master. I respect that, but I'm not going to fight under you again. No, it's not happening. And
actually, it's interesting as well, because by putting the Terrans kind of up forward, and they took the brunt of this. It was, there's talk, isn't there, that they were the ones that had been inducted into the lodges at that point.
Yeah, they'll also be the ones who were taken from those tribes, so they're more cruel ones, right. As well. So more inclined to turn, but also represented that aspect of the Legion that Corax had less affinity with anyway, and were less inclined to follow his style of. So it all worked to cleanse the Legion in a weird way, almost in an opposite way to the way the Word Bearers did it. This was Corax utilising an opportunity to, like, if I'm going to have to do this, then let's make let's use the people that aren't necessarily as on side with my plans.
Which is fine, but of course, the fact that it leaves him with so few bodies afterwards is not a great sacrifice.
Yeah, it definitely insulated them to the point where there weren't that many Raven Guard that turned compared to all the other legions. Which, yeah, good for them. Bless them. I mean...
yeah, exactly. Good for them.
Many died, but not many turned.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. That's a wonderful thing. But obviously, as you see with what's to come in this fan, it doesn't help them per se.
Indeed. Let's talk a little bit about Deliverance, then we'll take a break. Deliverance, it's their home world now, this barren moon in orbit around Kievar. Talk about barren. It's a scoured wasteland of industrial exploitation in the good old way that only the Imperium can.
Right.
Yeah, but it's been now turned into this the home for the prison has become their home, and I quite like that aspect of this is proper deliverance for that planet and for what was there. But what we also have then is this Forge World really close by. So they can work very closely with Mars for what they need, so that this specialist equipment becomes that much easier to integrate. But also because it's that close to Deliverance, it also has this sort of level of independence, which Mars can never really push back against too much. So it's that kind of weird Space Marine Forge world.
Yeah, it's a weird relationship, isn't it? And it's nice because also on Deliverance you have their kind of their fortress, what they kind of term the Raven Spire. Right, isn't it? So it's where the overseers from Kievar used to be, and it's now been kind of repurposed. Which is a really nice kind of like positive way of representing the kind of taking back of the moon, of Deliverance, and making it their own thing, and calling it, of course, a Raven Spire is very, very much in line with the nature of the Legion itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And they, it talks about a relationship with Griffon 4. So, they did have these relationships. They're not isolationist in terms of their secrecy, but they don't bring many people into the fold that close. But when they do, it works well together. So they're just on the edges of the Imperial society rather than being outcasts or anything like that. They just keep everyone a bit at arm's reach. Except if you do make friends with them, then you're good friends with them.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we should take a break and we'll come back and look at the Legion unit structure.
Cool.
What's a Geek Shield? Is it like a Breacher Shield?
Not exactly. Geek Shield is an insurance service giving you hobby rewards along the way. We appreciate that life insurance is a bore, so we wanted to make things a little more exciting with rewards that matter to you. Cool, right?
Okay, so why life insurance? I have Feel No Pain. Isn't that enough?
Very different thing. Life insurance can be used to settle off your mortgage, help with raising your children, or cover your funeral costs. It's never going to save you, but it will save your loved ones from financial disaster. Here's what some of our customers have to say.
Pete really will give his all to try and find a better policy for cheaper and give you vouchers. Why would you not do it?
It's great to know I have security for my family. Of that, I am certain.
Thanks to Geek Shield, my wife now questions if I'm still worth more alive.
Thanks to Geek Shield, I get to murder my family in the name of the Dark Guns and get all the money.
Yeah. So head over to geekshield.co.uk to book your free consultation today. Terms and conditions apply. Geek Shield is not a physical shield, nor will it save you from the Primordial Annihilator.
So the structure and organisation of the Legion, fairly standard to start with. In chapters and battalions and companies and squads, and one thing is they consider themselves part of a company rather than a chapter, because the one thing they do differently, and part of that guerrilla war nature, is they value the independent thought and planning process. and that is really important for the way they work in the field as well. So right from the start of this commander responsibility in the lower echelons, they can make they're trusted to and are expected to make tactical decisions without the word from higher up the chain of command.
Yeah, which is a nice, actually positive nod to the tribal element of the history of the Legion.
Yeah, that they have this grand understanding of how to fight, and then they are given tasks and are expected to go off and deal with them, which allows much more fluidity. And certainly at the start of the Heresy became a vital, important part of how the Legion continued to fight. And we see that particularly with the crew of the Sisypheum, where the Iron Hands are, we see it with the Shattered Legions in general, to be fair, where particularly the Iron Hands, who are very rigid, start to look at the way the Raven Guard fight and think, hold on. And actually, as we look at 40k with the chapters, is much more the way they work in that respect. Smaller forces able to go out and do their thing, but working to a greater objective, hopefully. But you're right, yeah, the Xeric tribes were doing the same thing.
Yeah. Although, as a side point, I feel like it still takes with the Shattered Legion, it still takes the Raven Guard banging on about how to change their ways, right? It takes years, feels like, for that to kind of bleed through. It feels like Sharakin is kind of shouting himself hoarse. Guys, we can do this a different way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's thoroughly expected, but particularly with someone like the Iron Hands, who are so wedded to the nature, and the Raven Guard, who are so flexible in their approach. Yeah. You're right. And also, it didn't help that they were really shattered.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't in the best place to be sitting down and talking about this reasonably.
No, absolutely. They also tend towards smaller scale unit sizes. Much like armed forces like SAS, designed to go out and deal with multiple issues that they might face. Sent out and have the ability to do their job, but also if their job changes, to be able to cope with the changes of what they're doing. Absolutely.
I mean, it sits with the structure of the Legion itself, and I always find it interesting as well that they are known for kind of fielding more of the kind of classic recon squads than maybe other legions would do, which ties in naturally with their style of operating, but also the line gets kind of blurred between kind of the tactical squad and the recon squad itself, and they kind of they're expected to kind of do the same job where needed and to adapt.
Yeah, where other legions might have A, the numbers, and B, the tactical kind of approach of having specialist squads. You can do that, and the Raven Guard can do that, but by nature of what they do, they have to be able to take on every task. Because the last thing you want to be is eight guys out and then realise that there's heavy armour coming towards you and you haven't got any way of dealing with it. That kind of approach. But yeah, it's cool. They had the full range of war machines available as well, but of course they would never say no to anything, would they, the Raven Guard? But they would focus on rapid strike, outflanking, mobility, and stealth where they can as well.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense for them to kind of refuse being given kind of artillery or kind of tanks or super heavy, war machines or whatever, because when the situation comes for it, they can make use of it. But it's not their classic style.
What's interesting is where we talk about the Moritats, and they came in, the 19th Legion employed more than any other. It's quite striking that these individuals that they had more people willing to take up a role where they might not return than other legions, and that whether that's nature of understanding the power of a single person being able to tip the balance of a fight in the way they fight, coming from their organisation and their guerrilla style fighting, because some of the other legions do have that honour thing, and you see with the Iron Hands there, I can't remember what they're called now, the unit that's trying to make up for their previous things, and they go out knowing they're going to die. But Moritats here, they've got lots of people willing to take that opportunity to go out there,
which is super interesting because the Legion's never been known for having a huge amount of men behind it. So
Yes.
So then to put that emphasis on a Moritat is much greater than it would be if any other Legion chose to use it in that way.
I suppose there's an element of knowing that you are going to have occasions where you have to put yourself in that danger, and if one person can be the person doing that, then you're only risking that one person. Within a style of fighting where you want to make sure that everyone's striking, retreating, not getting pinned down, and risking the mass casualties. That people will go.
Everyone in the Legion knows the value of sacrifice.
Exactly.
Right?
I'll take this one for the team. So there's an element of that, I suppose. But that's cool. What is interesting is the remembrancers were kind of discouraged from bearing witness to a lot of stuff coming down afterwards.
It's like, keep it secret, guys. So the last thing they want is kind of remembrancers documenting everything.
Which suggests it opens up this suggestion that actually there are more assassinations and sabotage things going on than they let on, which I like. That there's this, you can come down once we fought. Oh yeah, we fought like this and we attacked here and we attacked there, when in reality there was this squad here and that squad there as well who hit these key structures and that one person was taken out. But you don't need to know that. That's fine.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, which is really nice. And then an interesting one here is Corax is not noted to be at the Council of Nicaea. And the librarians were reassigned into line companies, though, again, Seekers, Moritats, and Vigilators being used as well. But it being really unclear as to whether they obeyed the Council of Nicaea at all. And we'll never really know because a lot of them died in the Urgal Depression.
Yeah, so it's really difficult to understand where that comes from and whether or not they obeyed it or not. But it also, again, ties back, whilst he wasn't present for the Council of Nicaea, it ties back again to that early war when they were faced with those psychic weaponry. You feel that there must be a tie between Corax instantly, agreeing to cease the employment of psychers and the history of the Legion and how it's faced psychic weaponry in the past.
But it also puts this there's that juxtaposition between Corax and the Legion itself being willing to fight differently and to use everything at their disposal. So there's that question will always hold over them of they said they agreed to it. But particularly something like a Moritat who's out by himself, and a Vigilator to a point, who knows what they got up to.
Right.
When they were doing that. So there's a nice little open-ended one for players of the Legion as well.
Yeah.
We had, so Corax, when he comes in, this command hierarchy, he kind of brought together the way they fight against overlords and things like that. He created this tactics and strategic maxims, which worked well with the Legion that he took over, as well as smoothing into this new one. As we said earlier, command roles senior command roles particularly were generally given to new warriors from Deliverance, and those who really served alongside him in the uprising, being turned into Astartes, becoming his close. Of course, we talked about the battle for Gate 42. That only enhanced the speed that happened. And by the end, you'd think by the end of Gate 42, that the vast majority of this command structure were people from Deliverance.
Yeah, there weren't that many Terrans left at that point.
No, and again, it's kept loose, and within the nature of that kind of aspect, when you give that much kind of responsibility, you also have to respect the feedback you get from that. So, candid and honest counsel is expected and valued, which is not the case in most legions. Like if you're honest and candid to Perturabo, and he hasn't,
right?
If he hasn't explicitly asked for that, then you're probably not going to walk out of that room. But yeah, it's cool. He's got an honor guard, known informally as the Shadow Guard, Which
yeah,
is
although he kind of resents having that on a guy, doesn't he? I mean, it's it's informal, isn't it? Because kind of the Legion thought really you should have some sort of bodyguard, and that stems back to when he was on Lycius. The kind of people around him kind of hoped he have a bodyguard to kind of just in case he was assassinated himself, and that then followed on into the Legion itself. So they're known as these shadow wardens. But Korax kind of begrudgingly allows them to kind of surround him, I suppose.
Yeah, and I like the little notes that you sometimes get in these black books. It's like though one individual could say that Korax himself, which goes right to the saying that Korax could slip his own shadow if he chose to do so. He just kind of every now and then walked off from them.
Yeah,
it was just like, yeah, no, I'm fine. But yeah, I think it's weird that it's said that they were ever present, though often unseen as well, which is kind of a dark thing within the Legion itself. It's a bit of a contrast that they would be unseen.
And it also, it's interesting that it ties into what you just said at all about the librarians as well, right? Because to have that power to go unseen themselves, maybe there's a parallel that can be drawn there. Yeah,
absolutely right. And what's really interesting then is, when you get sent a wolf pack as well. But hey, that's all part of the fun. As that proves, he more than most Primarchs would operate alone or with a very small band of warriors that he would pick specifically to either be able to keep up with him or whatever. The more Dratha or Shadow Masters. You get to play these at least, which is good.
And they are great.
Yeah, they are, and they're super cool. But he would often just go out by himself on extensive recon or deep infiltration, and allow his command structure to fight, big fights, while he did that main thing, making the most of his abilities really, which is. Yeah, it's interesting because we don't always get to fight. It's in Vengeful Spirit, isn't it? When Horus is like, "No, I'm going to fight this fight. Like I've been sat here for ages. Are you saying I can't fight this fight? I'm going to go down and fight this fight." Whereas Korax, I think, would generally be like, "Well, I'm a useful tool. I'm the best we've got, so I should be out there doing my thing."
Yeah, he always saw his purpose in that way, and every legionary within the Legion had their own job to do, or had the ability to do the right job for them. And I think that's the same for him as the Primarch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's everything is a tool and needs to be used the right way. Which is weird when we get to. Well, it's not weird, but it's interesting when we get to the Deliverers, because it's a very different aspect, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of the Deliverers, the kind of Terminators. They're not really naturally kind of Raven Guard-esque elements, really.
No, absolutely right. So we've got a Legion renowned for fast strokes, hit and run raids. Even before Korax took control, and that only kind of became more embedded as they went forwards, as other legions took over more kind of traditional attritional warfare. But we had the Terminator project, and most Raven Guard don't like the idea of Cataphracti Terminator, but some jumped in, serving, particularly when serving with the Lunar Wolves. But they got known as this as Deliverers, both for the carnage they wrought and the tendency to deploy when the daring assaults the Legion favoured threatened to fail. So Horus,
they're the last chance, aren't they? They're like the last chance in a way.
Yeah, and Horus honoured them. These fit within the kind of fighting that Horus would like as well.
And they're known as being this kind of. They're almost like a symptom of Korax's rage, I suppose, when things are starting to fail around him, when the plan is not coming together in the way it should do, then you have to unleash this type of legionary that's very different from the slick Mark VI equipped bulk of the Legion itself.
Yeah, they're the unsubtle. They're the hammer, as opposed to the knife. That needs every now and then will just need to be pulled out, and again shows that no matter what legio, no matter what style of fighting they go for, they've always got an option.
Yeah, exactly. However rare that option is deployed, they are available.
Indeed. And so we lead up to the start of the heresy. The Raven Guard were almost committed in full to Thetos Groton binary system when word from Rogaldorn reached them about the muster at Isfahan and Horus's betrayal. And most of the Legion was sent up to meet with his brother, but he did send some back to Deliverance to guard against a counterattack, which is kind of it's an interesting mark that you wouldn't get with a lot of the other legions. They were very focused on retribution, whereas the Raven Guard a little bit more, as you say, thinking slightly differently from everyone else. We're like, okay, well, we're not going to overcommit into one spot. But
they didn't really have the numbers to be able to do so as well, right? They always had to be thinking about leaving some element behind.
Yeah, and it's not a huge amount. Was it around 1,000 legionaries and 80,000 Therian cohort Imperial Guards? But yeah, it's all good. Obviously they had some that weren't there. There were Nomad Perdition fleets, which is a great title, serving beyond the fringes of the Imperium or attached to rogue traders, militant, or other lone wolves. That's cool. Lord Arcus Farl leading one of these fleets, which is cool.
It's nice to see him pop up again, right?
Yeah, and what's really nice, actually, is that what happened to him is unknown, but Corax didn't really bother to recall him. So, he's off somewhere doing something. So there, if you want your traitor Raven Guard or your Black Shield Raven Guard or whatever, there's, obviously you don't need something written in there to tell you that there's space to do it. But the fact there is this little section with this, this dude, Arcus Farl, is old and has he's been powerful, but he's off doing his little thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it gives you that option, doesn't it? Which is a nice narrative play.
Yeah, and they head off to Isfahan 5 with not many people, and certainly not many people afterwards. What does it reckon? Only 4,000 survived, including the 1,000 that were sent back to Deliverance. So, of all the legions, the Raven Guard really, really suffered.
Yeah, they really get hit by it. Which is really kind of alarming. But I think it's great. I think it's great in a way because if any legion had the tools to survive with that small number, it was them.
Yeah, and to have an effect.
Right.
Yeah, they were set up for that, and that they struggled less. We see particularly the Iron Hands really having a hard time coming to terms with, and it doesn't help their Primarchs being killed, but
of course.
But really coming to terms with what they do afterwards. And you think, actually, if Corax had been killed there, yes, the Legion would have suffered, but nowhere near the same way because they're built in a different manner.
Yeah, and the tools and the lessons have been passed down to the Legion as a whole, so they could carry on in the same role as before, even if they didn't have the guidance of Corax himself.
Indeed. We should jump into a few of the exemplary battles. As you say, early on, those battles tend to get classed as Lunar Wolves battles. So, for the first 100 years or so of the Crusade, their presence in those actions is unremarked generally by the order of the Remembrancer, and so we have to look at once we move past that, we have the Battle of Hell's Anvil, which is highlighting the new way of fighting. So this is a massive fortress on Baratrum, a world whose population live below ground in factory warrens sustained by prescribed technology and rampant techno-heresy. It's the best kind of techno-heresy, I find.
Yeah,
It's the
right.
the rampant one, yeah. What's good about this kind of fight is it reminds you that actually, even in the Crusade era, the Imperial Army were doing a hell of a lot of fighting. They'd been here for 5 years, trying to destroy the Overseers, and had achieved very little. Even when they did breach the small warrens, the enemy sent hordes of mechanically augmented human drones who sealed the breach with bodies of their dead. Lovely.
Yeah, it's kind of depressing, isn't it, for the Imperial Army? They're doing their thing. Five years of kind of carnage with not really making a dent is depressing. But that's the nature of this grim dark world.
Indeed, absolutely. And you particularly if you went and read something like Siege of Vrax for 40k, there were 7 odd years or something they were there. Yeah, it's madness, but that's the nature of the beast. So we got 3 full chapters of the 19th, led by Shadow Lord Arcus Farl, with a sizable contingent of lunar wolves to turn the tide. So they haven't got much extensive siege weapons. But what we have got is the Ashen Claw chapter, led by Nurat Kirain, coming up with this alternative plan to storm the Warrens, which kind of highlights how brutal they could be in the early days. So we open with a concussive bombardment from orbit designed to unearth the walls of Hell's Anvil through brute force. They're not worried about collateral damage at this point. This is not the fight for that. We got 3 Imperial Army regiments ordered into the canyon left by the bombardment and told to defend positions in the mud and toxic fumes, whilst these frenzied worker drones then come out for them. And these army regiments are in a bad way and calling for help.
Right, yeah, they're brutalised, aren't they?
They are absolutely brutalised, but they don't get any help. Their calls are answered only in silence. But at that point, so the Astartes then line the crest of these ridges, but they only advance when basically they've emptied themselves out. So all these,
they're waiting, aren't they?
Yeah, they're waiting to all these bodies to come out so they can go in behind. Those poor army guys are just the bait to do so.
They're the whipping boys, aren't they? Really, just being sent there to draw out the force, take the brunt, so the Legion can go in.
Yeah, and they do, and then they fight this hit and run war within the tunnels themselves. Yeah, opposite. So the Overseers, who have shriveled human bodies encased in crude augmetics, bristling with weaponry, and they whittle them down in the way that Raven Guard do. Strike and fade, and always, at the same time, always going deeper into the core of the fortress at all points. And after hours of fighting, they find the plasma reactors deep below the surface, and also one of the biggest Overseers. But the mounted charges are placed, and the Shade Captain and his bodyguard kind of spend their time harrying the enemies using their jetpacks before then retreating. And what we end up with is this explosion of avalanches of boiling mud flying across the landscape, causing more hurt to the army regiments. Bless them. Val put the drones to sword as they came, caught them in the pincers. And when the Ashen Claws gave them a solemn salute in stark contrast to the raucous celebrations of the Lunar Wolves with winning, this is 10,000 Imperial Army deployed, less than 1,000 surviving, whereas the Legionaries suffered only a few hundred casualties.
Yeah, so no wonder the celebrations for the army were slightly muted.
Though the cost was high, they considered it less than might be expected in a full-on siege, and therefore was a mighty victory. But it did establish its reputation for the 19th as harbingers of death for those mortal forces they were assigned to support them. Yeah, that's you wouldn't. It's weird to think that you wouldn't want to see Raven Guard coming.
Yeah, right, and it's so brutal that it's almost strange to kind of classify this as an exemplary battle.
Yes.
I don't think anyone's going to be telling singing songs of this one.
No, and it notes in there that it took years of campaigning under Corax to turn the reputation around from this kind of fearsome one to one where they welcome the 19th coming. But yeah, that was pre-Corax, towards the end of the period of the Lunar Wolves being having their claws on them, as it were. But we do have the compliance of Indra's Soul. So this is Corax is with them now.
50 years or so, isn't it? After he's been with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've started to take on this new style of war. So we're in the galaxy's northern fringe. We find Indra's Sol, this what must have once been a mighty exploratory port for the fleets of the Dark Age of technology, but is now a wasteland with just a kilometre-wide spire of silver that reaches out to the void, with docking terminals on top, which is I always love these kind of images that they have for this crazy huge stuff that exists in 30k. It's madness. And we have the Crave. They've been here harvesting the planet systematically for centuries, but they don't quite know how they've enslaved them.
But again, it ties back. I mean, of course, the Raven Guard had to be there, right? That classic, that slave culture. You've got to call on one legion. It's got to be the Raven Guard, right?
Definitely. And I like the fact that they have, serious discussions between each other. They're all respected. These ideas are put forward. So some people, I like the idea of a nerve phage gas to clear the spire of living beings and claim it once it was clear. But no, Corax has a little bit more of a plan. So he's got no knowledge of how many Crave there are, and he refused to commit his legion or the Theron cohort into a war of attrition. So we're already seeing that change in approach. Instead, he personally leads a force of 2,000 chosen from the reconnaissance and infiltration companies. So we're really seeing the Raven Guard at work here. Shadowhawk and Darkwing gunships, where are they? Used to board the spire at its midpoint, splitting into several dozen combat commands with their own tasks, equipped with teleport beacons. In each compartment, they encounter the wretched and malformed human population packed in like cattle, and also some lone Crave. Huge monstrosities gorged on their captives, impossibly strong, and wielding foul warp glamours. I think, both Terran and Deliverance warriors instinctively fell into a pattern of guerrilla warfare, so he's really having an effect not just on his own warriors but the Terrans as well.
Because these Crave, they are really strong to defeat as well. So it's about kind of they are learning that hit and run tactics to try and take them out. Yeah, and what must be hard is with hearts hardened to the cries of the captives, the Raven Guard struck at the Crave as they fought for hours within the spire. That must have been difficult for them to do, but knowing it's the right thing in the long run. And as the day wore on, Corax discovers the first hibernation vault amongst the decaying leftovers of hundreds of dormant. We have hundreds of dormant Crave, each equal to the monsters that take these huge death tolls on the Raven Guard by themselves. Corax and a demi-company of his fought a rearguard action as the remainder of the fort is essentially they've left teleport beacons and Corax Corax holds them off. But it's the psychic energy and huge claws these Crave have. They start to fall. The Raven Lord is struggling to hold them back for almost an hour before the Deliverers arrive. An array of fearsome weapons not normally associated with the subtle tactics of the Raven Guard. They push the Crave back with mass fire, forcing their way into the vault with a brutal application of ordnance. That's a great term. Which shows how kind of how they waited to bring in Deliverers, right?
Till that point they were needed, and and here they're waited till the point where there's no captives around either, because they do not care what they're shooting at. They pay no heed to any destruction they're causing. It's a torrent of burning promethium and heavy mass fire and everything else. And they do this repeatedly throughout the whole structure. Section by section they go through, with leaving the Theron cohort, the Imperial army, to free the captives that remained and try and calm them down. They're there. And eventually it becomes, they take it and it becomes their base for a push into the Ghoul Stars before being handed over to the Mechanicum. So, yeah, it's that kind of mix of the old and the new, and these deliverers are that last resort. And Corax makes sure to use them in the right place. He wouldn't use them when, there's a lone crave with loads of captives, because those captives would die to the fire going on around them.
Yeah, exactly. But what's really sad is this kind of final note at the end of this one about how the iterators and the Imperial servants that followed on from the Raven Guard's advance can they condemn the survivors to this living death as servitor labourers. They're seeing them as corrupted in both mind and body. And Corax never really finds out that that's the case.
Thank heavens.
Yeah, right, because it's kind of the opposite of his intention, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be freed from one, to be put into some other kind of slavery of a different type is not exactly akin to the history of Corax and his own upbringing.
No, in his principles, you would struggle to think that he would take that laying down.
Right.
He might not necessarily turn on the Imperium, but we saw with Horus and the way he misused the Raven Guard that he would just walk away from them.
He might need to send Russ in to calm him down again.
Yeah, indeed. As he's very much a peacemaker, is Russ.
Send in the envoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that highlights again the Imperium. When we talk about the goodies and the baddies in this structure, it's very hard to put the Imperium on the goodie side, or anyone in that matter. But we have one more in the Caranay Retribution. The conquest of Caranay Solidarity remains a black mark on the record of the Raven Guard. They are recorded as being responsible for the campaign's delay and the excessive casualties to Imperial Army units assigned to the fighting. 30,000 legionaries and 60,000 soldiers of the Imperial Army arrived in the Caranay system, making swift progress on the conquest of the 1,000 Moons of Caranay, immense void cities that circled the primary. These are remnants of powers of the Imperium that the Imperium no longer possessed, inhabited by those who refused to bend knee to the Emperor. Bad boys. Immense fortresses in their own rights. They've got huge weaponry at their disposal, but they're fighting independently. The Raven Guard initially making the most of that fact, isolating and striking these moons one at a time, taking them down. All going well.
Yep, so
far. Until the moons fight back. So we got Zenith 312. The Deliverer assault barge is about to dock. The Arch Controller released a Pan-Anima Phage into the city, an Age of Strife weapon of great power, turning men into creatures of rage and hunger, losing their reason and memory. The Raven Guard being safe from the effects, but the citizens of the city and the soldiers of the Imperial Army were not. Within minutes, the ammo had run dry as they fought against the bestial foes. Hours of close combat slaughter as they cleared the city of all non-Astartes life. Lovely. And in this time, the Arch Controller uses time to escape, as they do.
Right. So he puts his sacrifice in and watches the Raven Guard sacrifice their own allies.
Yes, and if anything is going to anger Corax, then the use of civilians like that is going to do it. And he swore to bring the Arch Controller to account for his actions. And they put the conquest on hold, which I like. It's like, no, you have seriously... There's one thing you don't do in front of Corax. It's this. And they sent off scout cruisers and reconnaissance squads to track him. And they found him in a remote outpost. Where he felt himself protected by the sun's radiation and a heavy armed battalion of Zenith Guard. So this means they're unable to bring large troop transports to pass close enough. So it turns to its Moritat kill cadres. Nearly 30 of the assassins and bringers of vengeance assembled. The assault cruiser Tenebros embarked upon the specially modified assault torpedoes. They are not taking anything for granted here. So a few of them succumbed to the intense heat, but the Moritats that made it quickly went on the offensive, slaughtering Zenith Guard platoons sent to investigate hull breaches before dispersing. They spared no one as they secured the objective, and in under an hour they had disabled the engineering, augers and primary shielding, leaving a bloody wake of guards, crewmen and dignitaries. With the outpost now falling to the sun, the Moritats made for the hangar bay where most of the station's defenders had fled. They left none alive and destroyed all but one transport, which they used to evacuate. Sorted.
It's amazing, isn't it? This one transport with however many were left out of the 30 odd. Moritats, this kind of squad of absolute killers.
Yeah, it said the station took 4 hours to break up and that Corvus Corax stood and listened the whole time as the Ark comptroller raged, blustered and finally pleaded over open Vox channels. The Raven Guard had avenged those killed in horrific actions, but in doing so had allowed the rest of the Void Cities to organise their defences, and the Imperial Fleet, Army and Crusade fleets had suffered without the support of the Legion. It would take another 7 months and the cost of many thousands of lives when it should have been fairly quick and relatively painless. That is the price of Corax's need for vengeance. So, yeah, there's an element there where he cannot let it go.
No. And that kind of stays with him, doesn't it? Really. But again, it's tied so much into his own upbringing that you can see that dialing through that thread. Yeah,
and it makes him really cool as well, and goes on to play into, as you say, later on as well. We do get more, and that's kind of the Black Book covered. We have, in terms of what happens in the rest of the Heresy, we have Deliverance. That's what the book's called, isn't it? I've had a mind blank. The first Raven Guard book, which shows us. We have the audios, and were they all collected together in Corax? I was trying to remember.
Corax Soulforge, that was the one, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we have some short stories and books, but we have the story of how Corax gets off Isfahan and some of the cool technologies and almost ripping the faces off fellow Primarchs on Isfahan, which is a lovely moment.
It would have been so sweet, right?
Yeah.
Until the Night Haunter comes in to save Lorgar's ass.
One of the many times that Lorgar's almost died to one of his brothers.
Yep.
And the story of Deliverance and how they try and rebuild and how they try and look at ways of making more Raven Guard in a swifter manner, and all the issues that go wrong with that.
Yeah, the really sad kind of, and how that leads to this creation of the kind of the Raptors, these kind of monsters that sit within Legion.
And what's really interesting about those Raptors is how they stay loyal.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and how Corax still uses them in a way, still includes them as part of the Legion, even though some of them are described as being so monstrous they can't even hold a bolt gun.
Yeah, but they're still
a valuable part of the Legion.
Absolutely. And Alpha Legion shenanigans all going on with that as well. But what I really like about that is it particularly opens up when we look at the Chimerae Black Shields, of having a really good option in there of having these altered dudes with very good reasons to fight anyone really in the Heresy. Yeah. There's lots of cool stuff there, and then we have some more short stories about their takings of different places and bits of fighting, but essentially the wearing down of Corax in the nature of the futility of this war.
Yeah, it kind of plays into it, doesn't it? I read just recently in the last week, actually, I reread the novella Ravenlord, which is well worth reading, actually, and that kind of illustrates the use of the Raptors, but it also has got some really nice moments in it where kind of Corax talks about the sacrifice kind of he makes by withdrawing himself from Isfahan 5, and how he made that sacrifice immediately and said, I made the decision to go instantaneously, but it's something that I didn't do lightly.
Yes.
But it goes back again to all the way back to liberating that prison moon, understanding the sacrifice of those decisions, but but understanding that it's the right thing to do at that right time.
And then what's really interesting beyond the heresy, as we see in his Primarch book, I think it is Correx it was out there doing whatever. And particularly in that Primarch book, you start to see that Correx's affinity with the warp has altered, changed, matured, and has become something that scares Lorgar even more than probably he did on this fan, which is cool. And it'll be interesting to see if Games Workshop expand on that at any point, wherever it is. Not necessarily saying a Primarch coming back into 40k, though that could happen. But
they leave the door open, don't they, for that, if they wanted to go there. But
even just some stories about maybe Scouring Era or wherever, maybe even after that, Corax, being that vengeful spirit.
Yeah, and it's nice. It's nice when you're playing a legion or you're playing an army to know that somewhere he's around, and there are those opportunities to bring him back in again. It's nice.
Definitely. I quite like Corex's arc. I know some people don't always get on with Gav's writing. Some people really like it. So there is, whichever side of the fence you are on for that. But we got the audio as well for it. And then, of course, we've got one of the coolest characters in the whole of the Heresy as well, in Sharakin.
Oh, he's so cool, isn't he?
He is so cool. He's
it's just that, I don't know, like just taking that sniper pot shot at Fulgrim kind of really cements someone as being an absolute legend in Horus Heresy, into my mind.
And his dealings with Lucius as well. He's I know some people don't like him as a character. They think he's Mary Suish. I think that's a far oversimplification of what he is. He's a very competent, cool character, and certainly not everything he does works. But he does one thing, as we spoke earlier. He does allow us to see how the legions are trying to link together and melt together, and how that may affect them going forwards into 40k. So particularly the Iron Hands struggling to come to terms with what they need to do moving forwards. But Sharakin's one of those voices there that's kind of suggesting that maybe there are other methods.
Yeah, and he's got a really nice arc as well, because he's even up until the Sons of the Selenar with Graham McNeil.
Yeah.
He's got a really nice kind of element in that story too.
Absolutely. Should we take another quick break and then we can come back and talk about the playing of the Legion?
Let's do it.
Right. The meat and potatoes for a lot of people then, the rules, the actual rules, if we're going to play a Raven Guard Legion. Again, just remind people, book 3, although I don't know how much of this has changed. So we've got they're all in the advantage of an older book, an older Legio, is you can find their rules in the red book, which can't be said for all the legions. But there we go. In fact, I'm going to have to go with the red book, aren't I? Because I don't know what's changed. This is one thing that you have to keep an eye on.
Not a lot has changed for them, so the red book's pretty decent, actually.
Cool. I'm just getting to the right page on that. So we have, they're Legion Astartes, so they get all the Legion Astartes rules, like regrouping and stuff. Yay, woo! It just becomes standard for almost everyone in this.
Yeah.
In this playing this, which is cool. By wing and by talon, Corax strove to forge his legion into a highly adaptable, rapid strike force in which each component had its own unique role to play in sealing the enemy's fate, and was trained and equipped accordingly to do so. So you get infantry, all the infantry get infiltrate and fleet. That's without Terminator armour, obviously. And jump infantry, bikes, jet bikes, infantry and Terminator armour get furious assault.
So, or Furious Charge, as it's actually.
Yeah, well, yes, true.
One of those Ford World
classics,
kind of fighting things. So,
yeah.
And that's their main thing, isn't it? Really.
Furious Charge. Let's remind us again. It's +1.
It's plus 1 strength on the charge.
It used to be +1 initiative as well, didn't it? In older
It's just +1 strength on the charge,
which is not bad.
So honestly, by wing and talon is one of the main reasons why I picked Raven Guard, because it allows you, if you are interested in playing a heavy infantry based force, which again a lot of people are interested in when they come into 30k or moving across from 40k.
Yep.
It gives you options to make every type of infantry interesting and useful, and I think valuable.
Yeah. Infiltrate is a very strong's not the right word. It's a useful rule to allow you to manipulate an army like this, because standing 24 inches across the table and running at your enemy rarely works, but also is quite monotonous for 2 turns as you're trying to get there and the enemy's just trying to drive backwards. But with Infiltrate, all of a sudden you can be on the objectives. You can force the enemy to come to you. You can close the gap. You're not super close a lot of the time, but you're also controlling board space, which you need to do when you haven't got the armor to back you up.
Exactly, it's that element of control, and it also allows you to utilize units like heavy support squads. You can suddenly get a heavy support squad, and you can get it immediately into place where it can do some damage instantly, which is great. You can do the same with kind of grav rapiers or any other type of rapier choice as well. It just kind of makes those. It allows you to get a bit more utility into a lot of the different units in the Legion's rulebook.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I've been playing with mainly infantry talons, the Emperor Force, and the same with that, though. Sisters of Silence being able to infiltrate, they become really effective units, whereas before they just try not to die. So, but it's cool. Have you used much jump infantry bikes? I suppose jump infantry you probably have. Bikes, jet bikes, infantry and Terminator armor, Furious Assault?
I've been using the whole lot, to be honest.
Yeah.
So again, what I liked coming into playing 30k as opposed to 40k was I wanted an army or a force that used all different types of units, and using it. I like to have a bit of everything. And this enabled me to do that. So you can get your standard attack marines. You can have them infiltrating, which makes them just that little bit more useful. You can have assault squads. I'm quite kind of a fan of using an assault squad.
Yeah.
And the fact that they have furious charge means if you want to give them like a power axe or a few power axes scattered in there, they're suddenly just dealing another extra strength on top, and that's really useful. It's the same with Terminators, and bikes are cool as well because they also get furious charge. So suddenly you've got something at like strength 5 with a power axe, strength 6, and the furious charge strength 7. It's just making them a little bit more, giving them a little bit more utility than they would have in maybe another normal Legion.
Yeah, sure. Do you find your weapons choices change a lot with that +1 strength in mind?
The problem in a way is you always fall back on the power axe, because it gives you the access to that AP2, and that +1 strength. So in a sad way, it is often the natural choice, I think, in terms of getting that points utility when you're putting together an army.
I think the biggest problem is the sergeant in Artificer armor. If he wasn't there, then something like a Terminator squad with all lightning claws becomes really scary. But with that 2-up armor there that you can't get through because of the nature of the way AP works, it always pulls you away from wanting to do that because of the initiative order of strikes. Yeah. But a strength 4 lightning claw, strength 5 lightning claw is an awesome thing.
Yes, it is, and I suppose the nice thing for them, for Raven Guard, in a way to negate that is we'll come to one of their special units later that has a particular type of lightning claw that will negate that. But we've all been there, haven't we? When you're faced with that sergeant with the artificer armor that's rolling that 2-up, 2-up, 2-up again and again and again as your heart starts to sink when your AP3 kind of bounces off it.
Yeah. And then you're
one. Also, there's some really interesting kind of tricks with some of the new. Whilst we're looking at the Raven Guard, you see those new units that are coming into play with each black book. So, for example, the nullificators, which you can have the Terminator nullificators, and they have that weapon that I think adds a +2 strength on it, which has rending as well. And again, because it's in Terminators, or you can give them to Terminators, that's an extra strength on top of that if you're playing Raven Guard. So it's a nice way to add again a little bit more utility.
Yeah, and certainly the focus of the game generally gets put on Marine versus Marine, but there are Custodians and there are Mechanicum units. What is nice actually would be, even with your Parax, is suddenly you're more reliable at taking out vehicles, medium vehicles.
Yeah.
Things like that is one of the side effects you don't always think of with that +1 strength.
Yeah.
It allows you those more options when you're fighting, which is cool, which is really cool. Groovy. War Gear, we talked about it. We should probably move on to War Gear as the next thing. The Raven's Talons.
Yeah, so these are their own special lightning claws, which you can. They're a 10-point upgrade on top of normal lightning claws, but they give them mastercrafted and rending, which is really, really good.
Yeah, so it's anyone with a lightning claw. So you could have 5 Terminators with them. It's an extra 50 points, or you can have other units with them. But yeah, particularly for the odd character, they become quite a nice little addition.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people don't put a lot of stock in rending. You're looking for that 6, and that's fine. But if you do have a squad that you upgrade in that way, you're going to be rolling more dice. You're going to get some 6s, and then suddenly they can be quite scary. And then when you throw in the mastercrafted or reroll of one of those dice, again, more often than you think, you get that 6, and it's really nice.
Particularly with lightning claws, and if you've got a character attached to a unit who might be going an initiative step higher, when you do have that champion with artificer armor in a squad, if you've got 5 or 6 attacks on the charge and you're coming in with Raven's Talon, some mastercrafted, and then re-rolling all your fails as well, you are increasing that chance of that rending. It's not the same as having a rending, a charnel saber or something like that. Well, that's not rending, but yeah, any normal weapon you're looking for 6s. Once you can add in a few re-rolls, it does aid things, and for 10 points is not too expensive.
No,
it's whether it's it's depending on who you're putting on. It's whether it's better than a Power Fist or a Paragon Blade or equivalent, like the few options you have. But a few of these dotted around an army isn't going to hurt at all. Improvisers. 5 points.
This is 5 points, isn't it? For any Raven Guard character can take it, and it gives them night vision, which is great, but also counts them as initiative 1 if there's a blind test that's required. So you don't see these that much, I don't think.
No,
because night vision is often it's not really required.
No, it's limited use.
Yeah, right. I mean, unless you're playing against Night Lords a lot.
Yeah, and on the other side of it, blind doesn't come in that much, although I used to take a fair bit with my Mechanicum. But it is what it is at the end of the day. But a nice little 5-point upgrade if you do have those extra 10, 15 points and you've used all your Power Fists in places, you might want to just dot the odd bit of night vision around. It's quite cool. But they also get a cameo line.
For the independent, that's for independent characters.
Yeah, indeed, and that is nice. So that improviser, it might be a case of your heavy weapons squads, something like that you're thinking. Actually, because then if you do roll night fight at the start of a game, there's no. It's so frustrating when you've got a las cannon and they save it on a 6-up cover save because it's dark.
It's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's just a silly little thing. So something like that, I would consider it if I had a few points left over. So as you say, coming line is independent characters.
5-point upgrade for them. You can't put it on independent characters who are on a bike or a jet bike or in Terminator armor or a jump pack. So it's just those one kind of characters who are foot slogging. But it gives them stealth, so it's okay. It's it's fine. I don't tend to take it that often, but it can be useful to kind of dot it around if you want to.
Yeah, and it depends on the role of what you've got out there, doesn't it? As to what you want for it. Should we do the rights of war now?
Yeah. So there's two main rights of war. There's the the Rite of War Decapitation Strike, which comes in the Red Book and Book 3 Extermination as well. And then they received another Rite of War called Decapitation Strike, which came in one of the later Black Books when all the legions got an extra Rite of War, I think. Or maybe it was more an updated Red Book. I'm starting to misremember. But yeah, so we tackle Decapitation Strike first.
Yeah, go for it.
So Decapitation Strike is, I think, an amazing Rite of War. And it was very difficult for me to play anything other than Decapitation Strike for a good couple of years when I first started with this army, because it is very much thematically the Raven Guard. It's about utilizing them to coordinate this surprise assault, taking out kind of enemy commanders, taking out various key points of the opposing army, striking hard, striking fast. So it's very much kind of akin with the theme of the Raven Guard. But there's a few cool kind of special rules for it. So they have for whom the bell tolls, which is all Legion Astartes Raven Guard units in the force using this Rite of War gain the preferred enemy independent characters special rule. Now, this is huge because fairly recently they ruled that if you're attacking someone, a unit that has an independent character in it, the benefit goes against the whole unit as well.
Absolutely.
So that was a huge change for them, and it makes things like plasma support squads amazing, or any kind of plasma that's used against a unit that has a preferred enemy in it, because you're getting to re-roll that one, which is fantastic. So it's a really, really fantastic element of this Rite of War.
Yeah, rerolls are king. Always have been, always will be. And this is army wide. So just all the time, that bad turn when you roll 4 5 1s to do anything, just with a normal squad, those extra hits mount up in a tactical versus tactical squad fight. Those extra hits add up and make a difference. You're right, particularly with something like plasma, make a huge difference. Melter guns, how many times do you roll a 1 to hit with a melter gun, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, there's nothing bad about that at all in any way.
And the fact that it works in shooting and close combat means you get to use it more often than you'd think.
And it's hit and wound as well, isn't it? So again, your strength 8 guns on legionaries, when you think finally I'm going to get rid of this 2 wound Terminator, or whatever, and you roll a 1 to wound. You're like, oh, for crying out loud. Okay, re-roll it. Crack on. You've got that chance of doing it. Play Mechanicum, I've always had the heavy support Myrmidons, who've got preferred enemy anyway, and it's just hitting on 2s, re-rolling, bosh, away we go, thank you very much. It's just repetitive, just seeing almost all your rolls to hit come up as hits is lovely.
It's nice, isn't it? Because it's that nice kind of aesthetic of rolling that many dice and then re-rolling, and it feels nice doing it. That's the point, right? And because you're playing 30k, it's quite common for there to be a few independent characters dotted around in your enemy's army list, and if you can get them open to attack, then you can really use this to some effect.
And as we go through, let's carry on, and we'll come back to that. Predatory Strike. So long as the force using the Right War forms the army's primary detachment, the controlling player may re-roll the dice to see who goes first / deploys first, if this is part of the mission being played. Sometimes there can be a first strike element to this game. I believe you've got to set up around that, but to have that bit of control over it. It doesn't say if you win or lose, you can re-roll it. You may just re-roll it.
Yeah. So it gives you that control.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is nice. And again, this Rite of War is built around those players who are looking to do that kind of striking hard, striking fast, or almost kind of an alpha strike. So it really does fit in well with that.
Yeah, and with the nature of what comes next, as well as all the rules you already get. So Fury from Above, do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, so Fury from Above. So that's basically where tactical squads, veteran tactical squads, tactical support squads, seeker squads, and heavy support squads may choose Legion drop pods as dedicated transports into detachments using this right of war, so long as their number does not exceed the Legion drop pods transport capacity. And in addition, Deathstorm drop pods may be chosen as elites rather than heavy support choices by a force using this right of war. So yeah, it's really nice because it opens up the drop pod. Which is not often used for many kind of legions, and other than outside the orbital assault right of war, and you can put a variety of different squads in it. So if you're putting together an army list which has lots of different types of tactical support squads or vets and a mix of different types of squads, you can put them all in drop pods, and then suddenly you're starting the game putting down 3 or 5 or 7, however many drop pods you've included in your army. Getting them down on that first turn can be pretty devastating. But it's also really cool and fluffy and thematic to play because it gives you that opportunity to null deploy. So to put nothing down on the table and then essentially bring most of your army in turn 1.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go through the limitations first, then we'll go back onto it. So only a single heavy support choice may be chosen as part of that force. Only a single console may be taken as part of as an HQ choice, and then no fortifications or allied space marines, which is fairly standard for a lot of these. So you're limiting heavy support, which is not necessarily where Raven Guard players are looking all the time anyway. Particularly with the nature of the way this works, with being able to drop in and infiltrate as a basic rule, and one console. Yeah, consoles are cool, but it's a minor cost, I feel, in terms of that.
Yeah, the limitations are pretty decent actually.
Yeah.
You're right. As a Raven Guard player, you're not naturally looking towards heavy support. There's no special kind of units that sit within heavy support. So if you do want to bring something in, people tend to bring in a flyer, or they might bring in a Leviathan, which you can tie in nicely with the whole dreadnoughts. Sorry, not dreadnoughts, drop pods. The fact that you can put a Leviathan in a drop pod, and that forms part of the number of drop pods you're taking, can work quite nicely there.
So
interestingly as well, because it says no Allied Space Marine Legion detachments, that doesn't preclude you from taking Allied Mechanicum detachments.
Or Guard. Solar
Guard.
Auxilia, which fits within the way they fought as well, which is really cool. But you can, if you chose to fill out your weaknesses with Mechanicum, Solar Auxilia, Cults, or Talons, something like that, then there's options to do that, which is cool. What I think stands out and makes this Rite of War really good, is the flexibility. So we've already said you can choose to re-roll the dice, win or lose, about who goes first. And with Fury from Above, with tactical squads, veterans, supports, seekers, heavy support squads, you may choose. So there's no hard and fast rule. It's not all or nothing. It's not everything like that. So you have the ability to go full drop pod if you want. If that's the one style, you have the ability to go a single drop pod if you just want to bring in, a specific unit to do a job, or any combination of that. So you can design your army to work in a certain way, which is really good.
And if you think about combining that with the fact that you can infiltrate all those types of squads that have been suggested there from the Fury from Above, is you can mix and match, which is really nice.
Yeah, and when we talk about control of the board, then if you're rolling and choosing to go first, and they don't steal the initiative, then you've got your infiltrators up to a point. Your drop pods come down at various points, and all of a sudden you can really you've got all the power over where your enemy is going to be able to go. Because you're choosing what units they can reach and where on the board they can be. And if you're playing an objective game, you can kind of, what I see people falling into the trap of when playing against an army like this, is they become penned in with no way of getting out, because you can force that, and you can be sitting there on 3 objectives across the middle of the table, and they're looking at, for the first 2 turns, they just aren't going to be able to get there. That kind of thing can be really powerful when it's played well. It can also lead you into trouble if you get it wrong.
Yeah, exactly right. You tend to find that either when you're putting together this kind of force, it either works really, really well or if you're coming up against something that's like a really tough anvil that's difficult to break into, and you're putting those drop pods down, and you're getting there in the middle of the board, it cannot serve you as well.
No, and it's something I'll talk about a lot on this show, and particularly on Full Stride. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should be doing it every game. Just because you design an army a certain way doesn't mean there are times when you play where you have to play against the way you designed your army, and you just have to be aware of that. Sometimes dropping that drop pod nowhere near the enemy is the right move. But it's that's something you have to learn as you go with the force and how it works all together.
Absolutely, and of course drop pods are wonderful, but we've all been there when it's there's a kill point and you watch your enemy delightfully take away those drop pods, racking up 5-7 easy points.
Yep.
Your armor 12 drop pod just staying immobile in the battlefield.
Or what's almost worse is when you're trying to deny the enemy getting too far across, and all of a sudden you've realised you've left this link of charges to give them free movement across the battlefield, and you're like, he should be moving 6 inches a turn, and yet he's moved 17 inches this turn, 14 inches last turn. And all of a sudden they're in your arm, and you're like, how did they get there? And you've left them this chain. So you've got to be a bit careful with that as well. But it's really cool. And you can see why, it plays into the features of the Raven Guard, as well as being a very flexible, decent Rite of War. And you can see why it's taken. Should we look at Liberation Force?
Yeah, so Liberation Force.
Should we start with the negatives again? Because just get them out of the way. So there's no fortifications.
No fortifications, can't use Shattered Legions, it's got to be Loyalist.
And no immobile or slow or purposeful, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so
that means you can't take drop pods.
No, drop pods aren't immobile.
Ah.
No, this is a common misconception. They become immobile when they hit the table, but they are not immobile units. So immobile units are things like tarantulas, things like that.
Yeah.
But slow and purposeful is, some of the Terminator stuff, things like that as well. But it's all good. So what benefits do we get?
So they get this rule called Freedom Fighters, which allows the entire army to gain the rule Zealot once per game at the start of a game turn for that entire turn.
That's not bad. So Zealot is it's hatred and I'm thinking of immune to psychology. It's different. Fearless. That's the word.
Fearless, that's right.
Yeah, different game systems, which are powerful. It might only be one turn, but that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah.
And then also it's got the rule Slayer of Tyrants. So that means Slay the Warlord gives D3 victory points if it's in play for the mission.
Which it is for the vast majority of missions, to be fair.
Yeah. So it's quite nice.
Yeah.
I mean, you might still just get one, but it gives you the option to potentially get 3 or 2. So it's quite nice.
And then on top of that, you get lead by example. So Allied Imperialist militia within 6 inches of a Raven Guard unit are fearless. And that's pretty good, because those militia units can be built in a huge variety of ways. If you're playing objective-based missions, that can be quite a powerful tool.
Yeah, and it's also, again, quite nice and thematic as well, having the Raven Guard kind of leading these militia units, almost representative of bringing them along with their guerrilla warfare campaign. It kind of ties back to a lot of the fluff that we've talked about earlier on in this chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see. So the only one issue I see with this is, again, you get this one turn where you can be a zealot, and it's the entire army, isn't it? So that would include
everything.
Include the militia. That's cool.
That's the point of it, is to unlock the militia for that one turn as well.
Yeah. So, the one worry is you can infiltrate and do all your crazy stuff with your Raven Guard, but your militia need to be within 6 inches to be fearless. So you have to be aware that you're not just running off and leaving your militia way behind. But what you want to be aiming for is that one turn where it's turn 3 or 4, where you can get the maximum amount of charges off and go zealot. But there's a lot of flexibility with, maybe a recon squad with a couple of militia squads alongside it, controlling objectives, and they're fearless. So big squads that can hold an objective, things like that.
I think that's it. You want to go for a kind of a big squad or a good amount of Raven Guards accompanying a good amount of militia to make it work. And I think that's really cool and thematic. I often don't think the Raven Guard have maybe the survivability to carry that on.
No, it'd be interesting. I think you're looking for a force that's designed to try and stay alive using cover, things like that. I think it'll be really tricky to try and get that balance right of how much Raven Guard and how much militia, and to still maintain the ability to kill things. You just got to work around it. I mean, there's lots of stuff you can do, and I'm absolutely sure there are a myriad ways of doing it. But the way you approach the game individually, you just have to play around with that mix. But that's cool. So those are the two. Plenty of fun there to fight. They work very differently, which is good, which is really cool. I like that Liberation Force. That's kind of cool. But they have some squads as well. So what do we have? The Mordathan.
Yeah. So the Mordathan, which we touched upon earlier, and it's great that they've got some really lovely models from Forge World. Yes, so these are the kind of the Shadow Masters of the Legion. And they come as the 135 points for 5, and they've got some really nice special rules. They've got Scout and Stealth, but they've also got a very special rule called Fatal Strike. So that says that once per game, a Mordathan strike squad may execute a fatal strike attack against a chosen target, utilising the precise timing of their attack to exploit their foe's weakness, coupled with specialised munitions to seal their enemy's fate. The Mordathan strike squad's controlling player declares the fatal strike at the start of one of the squad's shooting phases. For the duration of that phase, the squad's shooting attacks have both the twin-linked and rending special rules, in addition to any other effects their weapons might have. In the case of sniper rifles, during the fatal strike they will rend on a 5 rather than a 6, as would normally be the case. So that's quite nice. And where this kind of ties into with the squad is every model in the squad must either take one of the following. So they must either have a shotgun, a sniper rifle, or a combi weapon. So obviously you choose which kind of weapon to take there and see how you could kind of the interplay you could have with using Fatal Strike.
Yeah, that's cool. And then 1 in 3, rather than taking the mandatory ones, can either have Volkite Charger, Flamer, Melter Gun, Plasma Pistol, Missile Launcher with Suspensor Web, and Frag and Crack Missiles. So playing around with that. How do you use these guys much?
I do use them. So
how do you equip them?
So I equip them with Combi Flamers.
Okay.
Which at first glance you think Combi Flamers, why Combi Flamers? But of course, because it's twin linked and rending, it means the twin linked means you're essentially re-rolling your hits. So if you can get them up close to someone, if you've got 5 guys each with Combi Flamers, you can put out a hell of a lot of hits. And because it's they automatically hit, you're re-rolling their wounds instead for the Flamers.
Yeah, not bad.
Which means you're re-rolling the rending.
Yeah, get more 6s.
So you get even more chance to do a hell of a lot of 6s. And the nice thing with them is because they can take a Rhino as a dedicated transport or a Storm Eagle. It's quite easy in a way to put them in a Rhino and kind of scout up the Rhino or infiltrate it and get them into that kind of first or second turn kind of moment where they get out and they can use their Flamers.
Yeah, that's cool. Shroud Bombs, remind me what they do.
Shroud Bombs means the enemy has to take a leadership test in order to charge them.
That's right. So there's a little bit of protection there. Might not happen a huge amount of time, but that little bit of bonus protection, that'd be frustrating for your enemy, wouldn't it, if they failed that?
Yeah. Or it tends to be more frustrating is that I always forget they have them.
Oh, right, yeah, fair point.
So by that time, they're off the table in the case. And, oh, yes, Shroud Bombs. Shroud Bombs. Really need to remember that next time. Be doing that for 6 years.
Yeah, they're cool. I quite like even that Fatal Strike with something like bolt guns. Like, it all adds up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's cool, right? And it's 5 of them. You can take a unit off of them. They're not a huge amount of points, but they're cool and thematic and fluffy and lovely models. Yeah,
and they don't stand out as being like they're not obviously broken. I think they're hard to use right. Be easy to waste.
Because of the Fatal Strike being once per game, that's what kind of stops them from being kind of overpowered.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I like that. That's cool. Okie dokie. Moving on to one of the coolest looking units in Heresy, the Dark Fury Assault Squad. So these guys are jump troops, jump infantry with power armor and pairs of Raven's talons. And they're already built in, aren't they?
That's right.
So that is awesome. And then the Chooser of the Slain comes with Artificer armor himself as well. And they've got Sudden Strike and Fateful Descent. And the Chooser of the Slain's got Precision Strike as well, which is oft overlooked and can be a really useful rule. 2 attacks each base as well, which is always nice. So 3 attacks with the claws.
The 3 attacks with the claws and then an extra 1 on the charge, so potentially 4 attacks each.
Indeed. And Sudden Strike +1 initiative bonus when they charge as well. And because they're jump, they get +1 strength. So there's strength,
That's right.
Strength 5, 4 attacks on the charge at initiative 5. And then before that, they have a cover save of 5+ on the turn they arrive via Deep Strike. So if you want to... and the beautiful thing about a jump infantry is you get that choice at the start of the battle, so you know what you're coming up against. And if they've got a Typhon, you probably don't deep strike them in a nice little clump. But if they don't, and you've got a spot that you can bring them down in, and you think they're going to be all right, they've got that little bit of protection, which is always the issue you have when you're deep striking stuff. I mean, they've got no guns anyway, so you're going to run, aren't you, after you deep strike?
You want to get them into close combat. So I generally find that they either... So I tend to take them, and I do take them because they're great. And I take them in a unit of 10. So I go all the way with them. So I have 10 of them, and I usually put an apothecary with them to kind of help that survivability. And sometimes I've put a chaplain with them to help that increase as well. But generally, you either find that they do amazing or they get wiped off kind of turn 1, turn 2. Because when they get into combat, they are amazing because of the amount of attacks, particularly if you've got a squad of 10 and you're rolling 4 attacks each with the claws giving them that mastercrafted and the rending. And then if you tie it into things like using Decapitation Strike, they could be getting rerolls as well. So they can be really nice.
10's a lot of points, isn't it? What, 215 points? Plus metal
they are
bombs?
expensive.
220?
But I do think...
It's not bad, though. It's not terrible.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when they get into a squad, they can really earn their points back pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So when you get them in there, and I've had them kill kind of Galval back, which has been really nice. I've had them go into Primarchs.
Do a nasty... Yeah, they can hurt because they'll be strength 5. Most Primarchs toughness 6.
Yep.
So
they've been really good. I've had some good success against them, and Perturabo and one of his bodyguards has been nice. As long as you can get them there, basically, the difficulty is just getting there.
And I suppose if you're taking a squad of 10, you only need 5 to get there to do the job.
Yes, exactly. 5 minimum. More is better. And then, of course, you just have to apologise to your opponent to be that guy because, of course, you're rolling 4 attacks each, but because they're mastercrafted, you can reroll one of those dice. So you have to be that annoying guy that puts groups of 4 dice aside.
I think you can do that fairly quickly. And if the opponent really doesn't want you to do that, you should have shot them. So it's fine. But yeah, you can see why they die because you don't want something like that being in your lines at all. Because, they're going to mince a squad. They're going to cause problems to Terminators and things like that as well. Because even if it's just weight of hits, the weight of wounds to roll, that's a lot, not to mention the rendings. They won't survive any hits back. But
no, exactly. They do their job. And if they bounce off something, they won't last for long.
And the models are fantastic as well. They're absolutely glorious. Yeah, I like them a lot. I could see myself using Dark Furies a fair amount. Cool. Moving on. Fast attack. Darkwing pattern Storm Eagle gunship. 275 points.
This is their variant of the Storm Eagle. So obviously we'll share a tier, pull one out for the lack of the Whisper Cutter, but we have this instead, which is quite cool. So basically, it's kind of a standard Storm Eagle, but instead it's got a It's got a Vengeance launcher. So it's one hull-mounted twin-linked heavy bolter, one hull-mounted Vengeance launcher with Eclipse missiles, two wing-mounted twin-linked las cannons, and Machine Spirit. And the Eclipse missiles are range 48, strength 4, AP 5, heavy 2, blind, large blast, concussive. So it's okay. It's quite nice. So it's basically you're swapping out the kind of standard kind of multi-melter with these Vengeance launcher.
What? Have you ever used one of these?
Yeah, I've used one a couple of times.
Right.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't really do a huge amount. The Eclipse missiles are fairly situational.
Blind, you're not expecting them to do much damage. I mean, large blast, 5 inches, I suppose, 2 shots, you're putting a lot of hits down on something, but I wouldn't expect much of damage-wise. Blind, when it works, is amazing. It's just beautiful. Concussive could be really good as well when you're initiative 4 and everything you're fighting is initiative 4. So I suppose the idea is to fire these off at whatever you're then going to want to be charging and setting up that charge.
Yeah, that's it. It's situational, isn't it? The other thing that's quite nice about the Darkwing is it's also got stealth as one of its special rules.
Yeah.
So that adds an extra element to its jink when it needs to jink, which is quite nice.
And outflank as well. Right, not to be underestimated. So you can deep strike it, you can come on as normal, or you can outflank, and with stealth, and with up to 16 models in there. So it's groovy. I'm trying to think of when I've used the Storm Eagle. I think if you want a troop transport and you're a flying troop transport, it's not bad at all. I quite like it.
It's true, but then why? The question is, why would you use this instead of a normal Storm Eagle? And I do use the Storm Eagle, and having that multi-melter at the front, as long as the 2 las cannons, I find it's just generally a little bit more useful than the situational Eclipse missiles.
Well, this is the problem with the Eclipse missiles, is they're killing Marines, which Raven Guard can kill Marines. Everything in the game can kill Marines. Kill Marines is never the problem. In Raven Guard, you're lacking those heavier options to kill the tanks, which makes that Storm Eagle... makes the gun on the front, the melter on the front, that much more worth it. Although there is something appealing about this coming on stealth flank with dudes in it.
It's nice. It's just you're looking for that extra element. When you've got outflank, the really nice thing about outflank is being able to get the kind of those weapon arcs into side armor or rear armor. And obviously you get that with the las cannons, but it just feels like if those Eclipse missiles were something else, then it would make that almost an auto choice.
Yeah, because there's no independent tracking on that either. Oh, you've got Machine Spirit, so you can fire the Eclipse missiles at a different target, can't you? With your Machine Spirit, I suppose. So yeah, you could do it that way. But yeah, it's cool. I like it. I can understand why it doesn't necessarily get taken in that respect. You've got other ways of getting up the board as well. Which is the other issue, but that's cool. Okie dokie. So that's you haven't got any more troop choices yet. That's just it.
That's it for the moment.
Oh, they need to update that, don't they? They need to get on this. But we have got some named characters. Alvarex Morn, Master of Descent, Nightfall 1. What a name, eh?
What a guy. The guy that that piloted the Thunderhawk that got Korax out of Ispan 5.
He's a legend. He is, weapon skill 5, ballistics 5. It's not bad. 3 wounds, 3 attacks. He's 2 up save coming with because of his artificer armor. That's not bad. Power sword. A Stratovox we'll get into. Nightfall pattern Stratovox. He is a Master of the Legion as well. So if you need someone to do all that for you, then that's good. A Warlord, if he's unless what's his name's in charge, I suppose.
Yep.
And the Bleeding Edge we'll get to on a minute as well. He may take a Legion drop pod, Storm Eagle or Darkwind pattern Storm Eagle as a dedicated. So he can come down by himself in a Storm Eagle. That's pretty cool. But what it does mean is you can attach him to another squad, which is nice.
Yes.
Who don't normally have that option, particularly for the drop pod. I think that's quite cool. If he's the Warlord trait is Coordinated Planet Strike. If Strike Captain Alvarex is your army's Warlord, then flyers and drop pods in the same army may re-roll failed reserve rolls. That's not bad.
It's not bad. It's pretty damn good. And it's even better when you're using it with something like Decapitation Strike that
Yes.
unlocks those drop pods.
Definitely. There's nothing more frustrating than when you're playing the grand plan to bring everything in that's flying and all of a sudden half the stuff's not turning up.
Exactly.
And there's enough out there which can play with your reserve rolls as well. So making the most of what you've got on or getting onto the table is good. So even just for that, 140 points that's not a huge amount so far. That's not bad for a Master of the Legion.
Yeah, that's it. Even if you just wanted to take him as base, just to unlock different Rise of Wars, 140 points is quite nifty.
Yeah, to unlock different Rise of Wars, if you're taking Decapitation Strike to reroll and to then put a squad that might not even be normally allowed even with those rules, I'm not 100% sure what the other units you could put in, but to put them in a Storm Eagle or a drop pod, is quite cool. So Bleeding Edge special rule. He's the Legion's primary drop assault commander, second only to the Primarchs. If he's to enter play embarked on a vehicle that deploys via Deep Strike, then no reserve roll is made for this vehicle. Instead, it must come on the first turn the controlling player rolls for reserves. If Alvarex is deployed at the beginning of the game, the controller player may re-roll the Seize the Initiative roll where this is applicable to the mission being played. Well, that's interesting. So if you left space in another drop pod where you could then choose where to deploy him, in some games you might decide not to put him in there and instead to seize the initiative.
Yeah, which means also that it links up again very nicely with Decapitation Strike, because if you do lose that reroll and the opponent gets to go first, then having that other opportunity to seize the initiative just evens the odds for you getting that alpha strike, or getting that first turn that you wanted. Yeah,
absolutely. And then also just automatically his roll, no reroll, he comes down on that turn as well. Again, for 140 points at that level, he might only be armed with a power sword, but that's not why you're taking this guy.
No.
Not at all. He's really good. And you can have another character around there if you need something that's a bit more killy. And then he's got a Nightfall pattern Stratovox. High-powered cogitator-assisted command interface used to facilitate the coordination of mass planet strike operation. There we go. If one of the controller's player's units wishes to arrive on the battlefield by deep strike and chooses to do so within 18 inches of strike captain Alvarex, then it will not scatter. Furthermore, models with the Legion's Astartes Raven Guard special rule deploying from deep striking vehicles brought into play in this way gain the counter-attack special rule on the turn they arrive. When barrage weapons are being used by the controlling player, line of sight may be drawn from Alvarex as well as the firing model itself. Note that he must already be on the table at the start of the turn for the Fox to be used, which is standard. So if you're dropping him in, then you could bring him in. If he's in the drop pod, you can bring him on turn 1, and then all of your drop pods land where you want them to. Or you could deploy him on the table to do that as well within 18 inches, which means he can infiltrate. So
yeah, exactly. So that's where you often see him being used. You infiltrate him with something like even some like rapiers or something like that. You put him in terrain, and then it unlocks things like we talked about with the Dark Furies, being able to bring them down within 18 inches, hopefully in a bit of cover, not scattering, makes them just that little bit more survivable if you don't want to run them up the board.
No, and you've got to seriously consider whether you want to charge 5 or 10 Dark Furies who've got counterattack.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of dude for 140 points. The only issue then, as I say, with if you are taking Decapitation Strike, is you're limiting what other characters you've got to go out and kill stuff. Because he is limited in that respect. But yeah, I don't know if I've ever played against him, but he's bringing a lot to the table for 140 points.
Yeah, he's cool. Basically, if you're not taking Korax, then he's a really good option, I think.
Yeah, as a force multiplier. That's very, very cool. Excellent. We should move on. Do you want to take Moritat Prime? Cadius next?
Cadius next, yeah. The Ravens Huntsman, Blood Crow, 155 points. So Ballistic Skill 6, which is a bit different. 2 wounds, Initiative 6, 3 attacks, Weapon Skill 5. So he's got power armor. He's basically a special Moritat of the Raven Guard. Power armor, refractor field, shroud bombs, melter bombs, chameleon line as base. And then he's also got 2 fulcrum hand cannons, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of special rules which we can go through. Precision shot, chain fire, which is the standard Moritat kind of rule.
Yeah.
And then a few others we'll talk about now. So firstly, can only be taken in a loyalist faction army. And his hand cannons, which you don't get on standard Moritats, are 18-inch range, strength 4, AP4, pistol, rending, concussive. And then he's got some special rules. So Relentless Stalker. During deployment, select one enemy, elites, or HQ choice as Katie's Next's chosen prey. Instead of deploying normally, Katie's Next may be deployed after all other units and infiltrators have been set up, and may be placed anywhere within 18 inches of his chosen prey, as long as he remains out of sight of all enemy units, gaining the Shrouded rule for the first game turn of play.
Ooh.
So it's quite cool.
Yeah.
You can kind of bring him in if you really want to put him close to someone. If you're identifying a target, you're hoping to get in with that first turn or second turn kind of shoot and charge.
Yeah, or even when you want to make sure that the enemy doesn't be too aggressive with a certain character, you can put him down. You can say, I'm marking him, and they get a bit wary and put him somewhere they wouldn't normally, and you're like, cool, that was all I wanted, job done.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties into one of his other rules, the Raven's Vengeance. So when in combat with a unit chosen as his prey during the Relentless Stalker aspect, Katie's Next gains the Zealot special rule. And if the unit is destroyed as a result of a combat in which Katie's Next is involved, or during a shooting phase in which he inflicted one or more wounds on the unit, an additional victory point is scored for the Raven Guard in games in which victory points are used.
Nice.
Which is quite nice. And
yes.
it kind of negates him being slightly disposable. Because even if he does die shortly after he's taken out the target, you might have gained a victory point from it. So it's quite nice.
Yeah.
So he's got the rule Ill Omens. So he may not be selected as an army's compulsory HQ choice, and may not be selected as the army's warlord, even if he has the highest leadership value. And he may not join units of any kind during either deployment or during play.
Cool.
And then Gunfighter. So skilled is Cadiz in the use of pistols as weapons of murder that he may use his pair of Fulcrum hand cannon in close combat using the strength, AP, and special rules listed on its standard profile instead of those listed in the rulebook. And he does claim the +1 attack bonus for using 2 hand cannons in close combat. So it's okay.
Yeah, that's not bad. Well, those hand cannons themselves, go for it.
So yeah, he's okay. He's decent. He's quite cool as a character. I haven't used him before. I don't see him used that often.
I think I would like to. So 18-inch, strength 4, AP4, pistol, rending, concussive. And because he's a Moritat, he can get 1,000,000 shots off. So the important thing is he only has to do a wound in the shooting phase in which the unit dies. So the character dies in... And you can do, if you've got a character with a bodyguard of 10 dudes, you could fire this guy and kill 2 or 3 dudes, and then fire the rest of your army into that squad, and you get that point. So this is quite nice. So I do think you're going to be affecting the game board in that. If I was playing against it, I think it really depends on terrain, to be fair, because you don't want this guy stuck out by himself. But then you are infiltrating. You do have options to try and protect them. But individual characters are always a little bit wary of big weapons. But then you've got Camilla Line and what else have you got to protect him? That really, isn't it? Refractor field.
Yeah, the refractor field, shroud bombs in case he gets charged. It's the balance, isn't it? Because if you want to get most of your points for him, you can't do as you just said. You can't just take advantage of that special rule, stick him between 18 inches of his chosen prey out on his own because he's just going to die. So you've got to really kind of play with the rest of the army to kind of help support him. So it's quite dependent on terrain, I think. Yeah,
but you're right in that if you manage to do that and then he dies, then he's net neutral points wise. If you're going to look at it that way, I suppose the biggest problem with him here is 155 points. And if I look back at 140 for Strike Captain Alvarax Mon, Wow. I mean, there's not much.
No-brainer.
Yeah, there's not much you can say to that, is there really? He's cool though. I really like him. He's the kind of thing. If I were to do an Isvan Legion, I'd be tempted to have him.
Yeah,
for Return to Isvan 5, as it were. Then he would be really quite cool, I think.
And I've seen some nice conversions online where people have used some of the pistols from the Necromunda Delac set.
Yeah.
And they suit him really well as representing those hand cannons.
I bet. Awesome. Well, we got one big guy to go.
The big guy. Do you want to take us through him?
Okay, Corvus Corax, Master of the Raven Guard, the Liberator, Chooser of the Slain, the Shadowed Lord. He's 450 points. So he's got Weapon Skill 7, Initiative 7, the rest are 6s. And he is Jump Infantry. We got the Sable Armour, the Panoply of the Raven Lord, Frag Grenade, Shroud Bombs, the Corvidine Pinions, 2 Architect Pistols, and then special rules. He's got all the Primarch rules, plus Sire of the Raven Lord, the Shadowed Lord, Hit and Run, which is a big one, and Bulky. So he's decent. Nothing stands out there yet. Except for Jump Infantry, because that is fantastic. But he is Siren of the Raven Guard. So Corax gains +1 initiative and +1 strength on any turn in which he charges. So that's strength 7, initiative 8. There aren't many with initiative 8 or more. So he's going first a lot of the time if you are chasing a Primarch down. And then all models with the Legions of Astartes Raven Guard special rule in the same army gain the Acute Senses special rule. And while he's on the table, do not have to roll to determine their maximum run distance. Well, Acute Senses is cool. It's good.
This is awesome. This is absolutely awesome, because if you're automatically giving all Raven Guard models an auto run of 6,
yeah,
and you're having models like Assault Squads or Dark Furies, putting them down, moving them 12 inches, auto running them 6 inches, means you're really likely to be getting in those charges turn 2.
Yeah, I think what's really important is for things like Assault Squads, I see a lot of the time the amount of people who deep strike them, and I'm like, essentially sometimes you're just not gaining anything by deep striking them, even if they turn up on turn 2.
Yeah.
So actually, what price are you paying? Every situation is different, obviously, but if they're delayed by a turn, then you're really losing out. And just as long as you can get across the board, and having a run of 6 means, if the enemy aren't giving you, if you can't charge the enemy by turn 2, then you've pushed them right back as well. So you're controlling the board space again, which is an important thing. And in that case, you're starting 12 inches on the board, so you're 30 inches across the board by the end of that first turn. There's not a lot you can't get to. And if you can't, well, then, you're really in control of what's going on the table anyway.
Yeah, it's really good, because it plays again into the real core strength of this Legion, which is kind of speed and mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I like it. Okay, the Shadowed Lord, unless he's part of a unit, if Corax
just quickly, Greg.
Yeah.
Just it's worth saying that Acute Senses ties in well with the Legion 2 because of Infiltrate giving them outflank.
Yes,
so
true.
That means giving that extra choice again on which table side you come in, again, is really nice.
Yeah, forget about that. It's been a while since I used it with my Space Wolves. The Shadowed Lord. So unless he's part of a unit, if he's not the closest target to the firing unit, or the firing unit is either a Psyker or a Demon of some kind, or another Primarch, only snapshots may be taken against him. So basically, if Corax is not the first target and you're not a Psyker or a Demon or a Primarch, you can only snap shoot at him. At the beginning of any Corax's controller's player's turn, Corax may be removed from play and placed in ongoing reserves. He may even be withdrawn from close combat in this manner, but only if his initiative is higher than of his opponent. So I don't know how many are equal to or higher than his. Fulgrim, Russ, don't know who else. But so first off, you can run him by himself legitimately. And
which is where you want him, really.
Yeah, you just have to be careful that you've got enough units between you and whatever's shooting at him.
Yeah.
And essentially it's the big unit. They have to be able to wipe out whatever's in front. You've got to be careful of that. But then you've got this ability to remove him from the battlefield. So if you're ever in trouble, you've got an escape plan there.
Yeah, which is really nice. And it means that often the only thing you have to be careful of is those Primarchs. If you are putting him into a Primarch, and I would probably say you probably don't want to be putting him into combat with a Primarch. I mean, apart from a few of them, maybe. But of course, a few of them do have the ability to have concussive, putting him down to initiative 1, which will trap him in that combat.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, you're right on that one. But I like the fact that what I almost like about this, my first thought was, if I'm pushing Corax up one part of the table and the enemy go for that plan, if they don't go for that plan, brilliant, I'll swing him in on the flank. If they do go for that plan, well, I'll just take him off. And all of a sudden, like your manoeuvring to try and get him has been wasted, and the army's actually on the other flank. There's a lot you can do with that. A good player can do with that. I like it a lot. He's got Sable Armour, so this is, here we go, provides 2+ and a 5+ invulnerable. In addition, any enemy unit deep striking within 12 inches will suffer a deep strike mishap on any roll of a double on their deep strike scatter roll. Enemy teleport homers and location beacons do not function within this radius. So essentially, that means no one's going to deep strike within 12 inches of him.
Yeah, so it's just further protection for him when you're running him by himself, which is really nice.
Yeah, and again, that's a large space. That's 24-inch wide area. You can use it defensively to protect other units as well, which is kind of cool. Or, as you say, just to protect him. It's a nice little ability. That's cool. The Panoply of the Raven Lord. So he's got... essentially, it's an artificial lightning talons able to shred the heaviest armor with ease, and an energized whip as well. So we got melee. Strength is as user, so strength 6, AP 2. He melee, shred, blind, fighting style, two-handed. So at the beginning of each assault phase, Corax chooses one of the following: Death Strike, all to wound rolls of 5+. Wound their target regardless of its toughness, and any rolls to damage vehicles gain an extra +3 to their armor penetration. It's not bad. Scourge, Corax gains D3 extra attacks. Shadow Walk, Corax imposes a -1 penalty on the to hit rolls of every enemy model which attacks him in an assault phase until the beginning of Corax controlling player's next assault phase. So that's really powerful.
Really powerful, because again, it and really lovely because it adds this extra element of choice and control for the Raven Guard player.
Yeah,
and when you're adding the extra +1 strength on the charge, so if you want to use Death Strike to take out some vehicles, then suddenly he becomes strength 7, so potentially strength 9 for armor pen rolls. Of course,
yes.
Which is really nice. And then having the extra attacks if you're dealing against a horde. Or just a standard kind of unit of 10 or 15 legionaries, then you want to be going for that. And then Shadow Walk with the -1 penalty on hit rolls is really nice if you are coming up against those kind of beat stick characters or Primarchs.
Yeah, it's a common thing for Primarchs to get stuck on units that they can't get through quick enough.
Yeah.
And Horus has the ability to swap weapons, and it's really big for him as well. There aren't many times you say Death Strike means you can go and take out big vehicles, which is really useful on the turn you charge. There aren't many times you're going to need a 5+ to re-roll, although there are things that can reduce the strength of an enemy, or things that can boost the toughness of an enemy. But maybe the odd Mechanicum thing, and as you say, someone who's got not Iron Arm, the other one, increase the toughness. And yes, Shadow Walk's really good. That means you can, if you do find yourself in the wrong position and suddenly you've got a bunch of Terminators against you, you can go, well, you've got the choice then. You can either go Scourge and have, up to 9 attacks to try and kill them, although you're only strength 6. If they've got 2 wounds, you can just go, you're -1 to hit me.
Yeah.
I'm going to ride this out and then I'm going to run away.
Yeah, and also it says you make the choice at the beginning of each assault phase. Yes. So you could start off with Shadow Walk and then you could move into Scourge or whatever. Or if you found yourself being knocked down to initiative 1 or blind and concussive, maybe choose Death Strike to give you the extra any roll of a 5+ doing the wound.
So I haven't looked at the FAQ to see if this is addressed. But Shadow Walk lasts until the beginning of Corax's next assault phase. So I could charge a Primarch and go Shadow Walk, so you're -1 to hit me. and I'm weapon skill 7, so I'm hitting some of you on 3s anyway. And then in your turn, I can go Death Strike, Scourge, to get D3 extra attacks and still be -1 to hit.
So I've always played it not like that. So
it's pretty explicit that it's till the end of the assault phase, and it's called out separately from the others.
Yeah, it takes until the beginning of Corax's controlling players' next assault phase.
Yeah. So during their turn, you still have Shadow Walk, but at the beginning,
that's right.
at the beginning of each assault phase, and the fact it's there additionally, and there's nothing on the others means it, to me that reads that it explicitly can be done that way.
Yeah, no, that is correct.
So yeah, that's cool. I mean, how often that will come up, I don't know. But that's not necessarily a bad thing to have on. You'll be running away a lot of the time and things like that anyway. But it's an option in there. They're quite cool. Anyway, the Corvidine Pinions. So his flight pack is a miracle from the dark age of technology. It gains him the unit type jump pack infantry. In addition, he may always make Hammer of Wrath attacks when making assaults regardless of any other factors. Such Hammer of Wrath attacks cause D3 Strength 5 AP3 hits. Additionally, when deploying via Deep Strike, the scatter dice may be re-rolled if you wish, and should you suffer a mishap, then the delayed result automatically implies instead of a random roll. When making a jump pack move, Corax may make a Vector Strike attack just as if he was swooping flying monstrous creature. So there's a lot there. The delayed result on the mishap is like necessary, I think, when you've got a Primarch who can Deep Strike. It would be foolish not to have that rule in there, but that's really cool that you can re-roll Deep Strike if you wish to use him that way. The Hammer of Wrath attacks are nice, Strength 5 AP3, they're nice, they're nothing special. The Vector Strike could be situationally brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it's only one attack, isn't it, the Vector Strike?
I suppose, yeah, it's only a Vector Strike, so it's base strength, isn't it? But then flyers aren't necessarily tough. It's useful then. Yeah, I was thinking you could add the +3 to it.
It's more utility, and that's where he really shines. I think, in my opinion, is just having so much different elements of utility. What
he can do is he can fly across a demonic Ruinstorm Demon Lord who's flying and knock him out of the sky, so he can charge him. Yeah, absolutely. You don't expect it to happen, but you go for it, and if it works, cool, crack on. Yeah, I like that. That's really good. And then we have Deadly Prey. So this is Dropsite Massacre and the Victory's Vengeance campaign special option. So this is quite cool. In this incarnation, he has 5 wounds and 5 attacks as standard. He has a 3+5 up save, and he loses the pinions and the Architect pistols. He carries a salvaged heavy bolter, Assault 3, and gains the Hatred, Iron Warriors, Sons of Horus, Night Lords, Alpha Legion, Emperor's Children, Death Guard, and World Eaters. He also gets Infiltrate and Scout, and he only costs 350 points. So if you're playing in a campaign, there's that option as well.
Yeah.
Or if an event pack allows it.
Absolutely.
Which is quite a nice little thing to do. I think Corax is good. You're right. You're not going to be chasing down many Primarchs. What you can do is finish a Primarch off. Yeah. But this guy can roll towards an army and know that he can face everything that army's got. He can go and kill a squad. He can go and kill characters. He can kill a tank. And all the time, he's hard to pin down as well.
That's the point, isn't it? And you don't have to put him in a Spartan with a bodyguard. You don't have to put him in a special transport. You don't have to run him protected by 10 or 20 other guys. He can be out on his own, doing his thing, join a squad, leave a squad.
He truly is 450 points, which is not the case for most Primarchs. Yeah. And within that, he's giving you +1 initiative and strength for... he's giving the alt run distance and the acute senses, which is a decent... it's not... there's that optional extra. It's not... The problem with combat characters is they don't always support the army, but that's decent support for the army.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you're coming into this game and you want to use a lot of infantry, then having the auto run 6 is just really nice for getting across the board, being mobile, getting to objectives.
Yeah, and that 450 points is reflective of if you play him well, how hard he will be to kill. Yeah, and everything like that as well, because it is, it's not cheap. And when he is essentially a combat character, It's not Alfarius here who's giving the whole, book of rules to everyone he has.
Everyone and their child.
But he's also really quick as well. And this is where, people look at Russ sometimes and think, oh my God, he's a monster and his points should be more. And it's like, well, he's got to run across the table at you and, or drive across the table at you, in which case there's 1,000 more, is 1,000 points and you can still move away from it and slow him up and things like that. It's harder to do that with Corax, but he also then can't just run into everything and know he's going to obliterate it in one go. There's that balance to be had, but I like him a lot. He's really cool. He's really cool.
Model.
What kind
awesome model as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you as you say, you started off with a decapitation strike. What kind of armies were you running when we could play games?
So when I first started this army, I really wanted to use everything I could. So sure. I wanted to build an army that had some Dark Furies in it, that had some more Dathan, that had Corax in it. I was just coming into 30k and I really wanted to maximise the use of the Legion and their special stuff. And I also really wanted a heavy infantry-based force. That's what attracted me to the Sons of Heresy. I wasn't that interested in playing tanks at the time. I liked flyers, and so that's what I kind of really ran with. So sure. I had kind of a core force of 20 assault marines running across the board, 10 Dark Furies. I'd have maybe a one heavy support option. I might have a Leviathan in a drop pod, and then a Corax around as well. Just multiple kind of threats, really, being fast and mobile, using speeders, outflanking, dropping down plasma support squads, getting that extra reroll with a decapitation strike, just really building an army list that was versatile, fast, mobile, and just really fun to play. And they really succeeded in that, actually. So it's been a hell of a lot of fun.
Where were you leaning? So obviously you've got plenty of options there for taking out infantry, but the one issue we did talk about early on was the ability to deal with armour. And where were you finding those options to deal with armour?
So two ways. One, obviously, easy crutch to rely on is having a Leviathan as your one heavy support choice. Being able to put that down in a drop pod with a melter lance and a siege claw is quite nice as a threat level. But the other really nice thing that I've always used for them is tying in with infiltration and having 2 units of grav rapiers.
Oh yeah, cool.
Because they can infiltrate, so that means you're going to have 6 kind of large blast grav blasts that are coming out, and then if you drop them down on Spartans, you can confidently knock one of them off in 2 turns,
sure.
Or take out a cluster of rhinos. And the nice thing about it is people never seem to mind playing against grav.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Isn't it crazy? Because there's lots of things that people say, oh, that's OP, or Leviathans are one of them. Oh, eye rolling time, another Leviathan's coming down, and I get that. But when they see 2 units of grav rapiers, they're like, oh, that's cool.
It's because they don't see them. It's as simple as that. It's because the problem with grav rapiers is unless you can infiltrate them, they rely on the enemies coming to you.
Exactly. And being able to tie in with the Raven Guard, because you get a 36-inch range on those grav rapiers, and being able to go, okay, cool, that's where your Spartan is, that's where your Glaive's going to be, cool. I'll just infiltrate them there, get that maximum 36-inch range, and then you're dropping three pie plates down, and it's really nice. But people still don't mind about it because you're never really going to be knocking something off in one turn. It's going to be stripping stuff down.
Gradual,
so people want to play with their models, so they're not going to ever have a tank just blow up immediately in front of their face. They'll be moving around.
They offer the army some resiliency as well, with the toughness. Those little grav rapiers, it can sometimes be really frustrating that you have to then go, I have to fire a decent weapon at them and I don't want to, which is quite cool. Do you ever look towards land speeders?
Yeah, so I use... I've got 2 javelins that I tend to use.
Oh, so good.
They go
so
in a squad. They're just lovely.
They are fantastic. They're so cheap for what they do. They probably should be a few more points up. But
I think so. Yeah. And I've got another one. I've been building another one today to make them a squad of 3. But I give them both multi-melters to go with the missiles.
Cool, yeah.
And having them running them with Corax as well, getting the outflank, getting the acute
Yes.
senses, being able to pull them in to kind of take off a few shots into side armor and rear armor is really nice.
You're a bad man. And have you looked at any of the new vehicles, anything like that? Any of the Sabres or anything like that, really? Because they're fast, aren't they, Sabres?
It's interesting. I haven't yet. I have. I've been running a few Sabres for my Blood Angels, mainly because I hadn't really been using any kind of tanks for my Raven Guard at all. I don't have a single tank other than a Rhino. But actually now, as I'm starting to kind of really develop them again, I've been doing a few more flyers. So I've done a Lightning for them and a Fire Raptor and a Storm Eagle, polished that up a little bit. But I'm going to start looking at adding some more stuff to them and maybe adding a few tanks into them as well.
It's an interesting one. If you're looking for efficacy on the table, then if you've got one tank, it can be a liability.
Yeah,
it's that balance of if you've got no tanks at all, then the enemy's las cannons are killing one Marine. And a bolter can do that. If you've got one tank, then it just dies. If you've got multiple, then a few survive. So there is that kind of thing. The one thing you said about the Leviathan dropping down is I found with armies with any army actually, you need threats. And when I was playing competitive Warhammer, I always worked on, back in the old days, it was my army was a combat army. Okay, so I need one unit has to get in and do what it needs to do. So this is my primary unit. But if that unit doesn't make it, I need this unit because they're going to focus on that unit. So I need a second unit that's a threat as well. And then ideally, I actually need a third unit. So if they can deal with two, the third one gets them. Now, if you've put and there's a principle here as well, like if you put a Leviathan down, that can kill stuff, but also can soak up a lot of pressure, and people can't just charge it. Then it creates this area on the battlefield and creates a focus for the enemy to have to deal with.
Greg, I feel like you've seen my armies before, because that's exactly my line of thinking. Really, is putting that down there. It's about having multiple threats. Yeah. So typically that comes down first turn. It's got its Volkite, it's got its Melter stuff. They have to deal with it. At the same time, you've got 20 assault Marines with Melter bombs and a Chaplain and an Apothecary charging up the board with the extra 6-inch run from Corax, who's in another part of the board, moving up one way. So you've got three massive threats that they have to deal with, and it's taking that element of choice, of forcing your opponent to make a difficult choice.
I think that's where I see a lot of the issues with assault squads for people, is that it's their lone kind of throw it up the table thing, and so the enemy just sits and I'll shoot that, and then I've got a whole turn to wait for the next threats to come in, and you need to be. And the beauty again of something like the Raven Guard here, where you can infiltrate your troops, so you're applying pressure, but you know that on turn 2, the chances are you're going to have charges to make as well, and your infantry can also be up close enough to make those chances. So you're saying to your opponent, okay, decide what you want to take, because you're going to have to take something. And good players will then, as players get better, or good players will realise, okay, cool, I will throw you this unit, and you can have that one. And in the meantime, I'm going to analyse the threats and decide what I need to take out now and what I need to take, what I can afford to wait to take out, things like that. But when you've got an army, it doesn't matter so much with tanks or with shooting armies. You can get away with it a bit more, but it becomes more important when you are getting up in the grill of the opponent, because I don't know how much of a struggle sometimes it is just facing a wall of bolter fire for your units.
Yeah, it can be difficult because they just volume of fire just chips them away. To be honest, when you haven't got stuff in tanks, in dedicated transports, it can really take stuff away. And I've had some games where it's worked really well. I've had some games when it's been a complete disaster. I remember one game I had at I think it was at Warhammer World. I was facing a Mechanicum player, and he had one of those. Was it the Ordinatus? Those massive.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Absolutely massive ones, and I was putting down all infantry. I was putting down, 20 assault marines, 10 dark furies, all running up the board, and I just saw that look on his face. I said, "You are going to have the best time just putting those templates all over those marines," and you just know you're not going to really do well against that. But that's the nature of the game. You can't win them all, but I I love putting down a huge amount of infantry and just running them up the board and having that mobility. It really just screams the Horus Heresy to me.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the front cover of some of the books and stuff. If that's your appeal, then Raven Guard can do it well. You got any tips on painting and collecting them?
So painting them has been a kind of a real kind of journey. When I first started, I was really looking to get something on the table pretty quickly. So what I would say, what has kind of lasted me, is the Forge World paint that they now do, the GW paint, the Corvus Black, is a really nice black, because it's got this real kind of tint of blue into it as well. So if you add a kind of a gloss highlight to it, or you shade it with a little bit of grey, it really pulls out that blue, and it makes it just look really nice, actually. So that's always remained a kind of a core staple for how I paint that army. But painting them has definitely kind of changed for me over the course of the years. I feel like I've got better, and I've just learning to paint white to give the accent colours on them has always been a bit of a struggle, but I'm getting there. So it's good. But I'd just say, look, if you're playing Raven Guard, just have fun with them. All their special units, I think, are viable. And if you really pick a theme, you can run with them. They're very flexible. So just kind of come into what kind of style of play you like, and they'll offer you something.
Yeah, and there's a definite, if you really want to go whole hog on the modelling, you can pick up you can really model them as survivors of Isfahan 5, and go to town on weathering and really mixing up your armour marks, all that jazz in there. I've just seen the pictures of the Dark Furies again. They're so cool.
They're so nice.
Cool.
They're so nice. And being able to just, whilst it's an investment, I've pretty much, apart from the special characters, I've put beaky helmets on any kind of unit I can, just because people immediately see that helmet and they go, oh, Raven Guard. It's just that immediate signal to someone else that that's the army you're bringing, which is really, really nice and just really unique, I think. Yeah,
it does stand out for them. Wonderful. Anything else before we leave? Any other tips on the Raven Guard or reasons to play them?
I think it would just be nice to see more Raven Guard, I think, at events. That you don't often see them, I don't think.
It's a funny one, isn't it? I think there's a lot of people get very much focused on, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, focused on, well, I don't want to play a Legion that only does this. And it's like, well, there's more than just Decapitation Strike, and there's more than just running it the way you run it. There are ways, there are things you can do with this army beyond that. If you wish to.
You're right. They're very, very flexible. And I think if you're interested in doing a Legion and you've got a Mechanicum force, it's really useful to learn that they're battle brothers with Mechanicum, and you can put Mechanicum in with their Rites of War, and they can tie up really nicely there. So if you're coming with a Mechanicum force and you want to try a Legion, then Raven Guard is a good one to combine them with. But again, people forget about the Furious Charge on the Terminators on the bikes. They just think Infiltrate, and they think, well, if I'm doing Infiltrate, I might as well do Alpha Legion.
It'll be really cool to see more of a mechanised Raven Guard force with some bikes, particularly with the new Hussars and the other ones. Can't remember the name, and then some Terminators as well.
Well, it's funny you say that. That's exactly what I've been working on at the moment. I've got some Outriders on the table, and bikes is where I'm going next with them, actually. So hopefully I'll be delivering that to one of your events when they are back on the table.
Oh, the puns. Yeah, I'd be tempted to get some Land Raiders as well, and some fearsome dudes coming out of them. You'd really shock someone. They wouldn't know what you're doing with your Raven Guard.
Absolutely.
Which could win you some games by itself. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Andy, and talking through the 19th. And hopefully we'll see each other at an event some point soon, and maybe even get back on the show at some point as well.
Thanks very much, Greg. Appreciate it.
Cheers. you've made it to the end of another episode of The Imperial Truth. Thank you for listening along. Thank you for Andy for coming on and chatting about the Raven Guard. It's good to get back onto one of these episodes. It's been a while. It felt like it as the voice was starting to fade a little bit towards the end there. As usual, all the usual methods of contacting us, Greg at theimperialtruth.com. If you want to email the Facebook page, feel free to come comment on the show thread. If you want to, Twitter, imperial_truth. I'm at Child of Fang on Twitter and Instagram as well. If you've got any feedback on the episode, think we've missed something, got something wrong, think Andy plays it completely wrong, then let us know. That's what I say. If you've got any general kind of tips or suggestions for the show, then please feel free to send them over. If you really like the show and you want to help out, then the best thing you can do is tell other people about it, because that's just wonderful. But if you want to go a little bit further, we do have some merchandise, some shirts, and you can find the link in the show notes for that, as well as the link for the Patreon. If you feel like you want to give us a tip for doing the show, then that's welcome as well, and thank you for those people who do that. It's really is well taken by myself. But I'm going to leave it there because it's been a longish show and it's getting late, and I want to get this show out. It's already a little bit late, but I want to get this show out as soon as I can. So until next time, you have been listening to The Imperial Truth.